The morning Lena Cross's life was sold began like any other in Timber Hollow, with the smell of horse manure, the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer, and the particular kind of silence that meant someone was about to suffer publicly. She stood in the cramped storage room behind McCready's general store, her hands shaking so violently she could barely button the threadbare dress they'd given her. It wasn't hers. Nothing was hers anymore. Not the cabin where she'd grown up, not the few belongings her father had left behind. Not even the body that carried her through each suffocating day. "Quit your dawdling," Mrs. McCready snapped from the doorway, her thin lips pressed into a line of permanent disapproval. "The crowd's gathering. Your uncle wants this done before noon." Lena's fingers froze on the third button. "My uncle—" "Don't you dare speak ill of the man trying to settle your father's mess." The older woman's eyes glittered with something that might have been pity in a kinder person, but here it was just another shade of contempt. Samuel Cross drank and gambled away every cent he had, and then some. Someone's got to pay what's owed, and since he's 6 feet under, that someone is you. The words landed like physical blows, each one true, each one devastating. Her father had been a good man once, or so the faded memories whispered, before the mine accident that crushed his leg, before the whiskey that drowned his pain, before the card games that promised fortune and delivered only ruin. "I could work," Lena whispered. "I could find employment, pay the debt over time." Mrs. McCready's laugh was harsh as winter wind. "You? A woman with no skills, no references, no family willing to vouch for you? Child, you'd be lucky to scrub floors for pennies. This way's cleaner. You'll have a roof over your head, food in your belly. More than you deserve, considering." "Considering what?" Lena wanted to scream. "Considering I had the misfortune of being born to the wrong father? Considering I'm a woman in a world that sees me as property?" But she swallowed the words. She'd learned years ago that protest only made things worse. "Come on!" Mrs. McCready grabbed her arm with fingers like iron. "Time to face the music." The walk from the storage room to the town square felt like a death march. Each step took Lena closer to the wooden platform that had been erected in the center of town. The same platform used for announcing elections, proclaiming marriages, and occasionally selling off indentured servants to pay debts. The same platform where, in 20 minutes, she would cease to be Lena Cross and become something else entirely. The crowd was already thick when they emerged into the harsh autumn sunlight. Timber Hollow wasn't large, maybe 300 souls on a good Sunday, but it seemed like every single one had turned out for the spectacle. Men in dusty work clothes leaned against hitching posts, calculating eyes sizing her up like livestock. Women whispered behind gloved hands, their judgment sharper than any spoken word. Even children had gathered, sensing the entertainment value of watching someone's world collapse. At the front of the platform stood her uncle, Martin Cross, resplendent in a suit that must have cost more than her father's entire estate. His silver-streaked beard was precisely trimmed, his boots polished to a mirror shine. He looked every inch the respectable businessman he claimed to be. Lena knew better. She'd seen the ledgers her father had kept before Martin confiscated them. She'd heard the whispered conversations late at night, her father's voice slurred but insistent. "He cheated me, Lena. Swear to God he cheated me." But dead men's accusations carried no weight, especially against the living who controlled the town's mining operations. Martin's eyes met hers as Mrs. McCready hauled her toward the platform steps, and his smile was all teeth. "There she is, right on time." The auctioneer, a weasel-faced man named Cyrus Grant, stood beside Martin with a leather-bound ledger and an expression of barely concealed glee. He lived for moments like this, public displays of power and desperation. Folks! Grant's voice cracked across the square like a whip, silencing the murmur of the crowd. "Thank you for gathering on this fine morning. We have before us a matter of legal obligation and civic duty." Lena's stomach churned as Mrs. McCready pushed her up the steps. The wood was rough beneath her worn shoes, splinters catching at the thin fabric of her dress. "As you all know," Grant continued, his voice taking on the practiced rhythm of a performer, "Samuel Cross, late of this town, departed this world leaving considerable debts. Debts to honest merchants, debts to the mining company, debts to various individuals who extended him credit in good faith." Good faith. The words were ash in Lena's mouth. There was nothing good about the system that had trapped her father, that had broken him piece by piece until there was nothing left but an empty bottle and a loaded pistol. She hadn't been the one to find him. That small mercy, at least, had been spared her. The total sum owed, Grant announced, flipping open his ledger with theatrical flourish, amounts to $347.62. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It was a staggering amount, more than most men in Timber Hollow earned in a year of backbreaking labor. Now, the law is clear on matters of debt inheritance, Grant went on, warming to his subject. When a man dies without assets sufficient to cover his obligations, those debts pass to his next of kin. In this case, Miss Lena Cross, aged 22, unmarried, and without independent means of support. He gestured toward her with a flourish, and Lena felt every eye in the square lock onto her like rifle sights. Heat crept up her neck despite the autumn chill. Therefore, in accordance with Territorial Statute 44B, Miss Cross will be offered for contracted servitude to satisfy the debt. The term of service will be determined by the purchaser, not to exceed 7 years as per law. The contract may include domestic labor, agricultural work, or other duties as deemed appropriate by the contract holder. Other duties. The words hung in the air like a threat. Bidding will start at $100, Grant announced. Do I hear 100? Silence. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. For one wild, desperate moment, she thought maybe no one would bid. Maybe they'd let her go. Maybe $50, a voice called from the back. Her hope shattered. Grant's eyebrow rose. Sir, the starting bid is 100. You heard me. The voice belonged to Jacob Brennan, a rancher known for working his cattle and his hired hands to the bone. $50 for a scrawny thing like that? She don't look like she could pull her own weight in a strong wind. Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. I'll give you 60, another voice chimed in, but only if she knows how to cook. Can you cook, girl? Grant called out to her, almost cheerfully. Lena's throat was too tight to answer. She managed a nod. She nods, Grant announced. The lady can cook. Do I hear 70? 75, someone shouted. But I want to inspect the merchandise first. The crowd parted as a man Lena recognized. Tom Grimsby, who owned the saloon, pushed forward. His eyes traveled over her body with the same clinical assessment he might give a horse he was considering buying. Lena wrapped her arms around herself, trying to disappear inside her own skin. Let's see your teeth, Grimsby ordered. The world tilted. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. She was a person, not... Your teeth, girl, Grimsby repeated, impatient now. Can't have you working for me if you can't chew proper food. Martin stepped forward, his voice smooth as oil. Now, Tom, I think we can trust that my niece has adequate dental health. Let's keep this proceeding dignified, shall we? Dignified. The man who'd orchestrated this nightmare was concerned about dignity. Grimsby shrugged and stepped back. 75 stands. 80, another voice. 90. The bids came faster now, the crowd's initial hesitation giving way to something uglier, competitive greed. They weren't seeing a woman anymore. They were seeing opportunity, labor, property. Lena's vision blurred. She focused on a point in the distance, on the mountains that ring Timber Hollow like the walls of a prison. Somewhere beyond those peaks, there had to be a world where women weren't sold in town squares, where debts didn't pass like inheritances, where $150. The new voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk, deep, quiet, carrying an authority that had nothing to do with volume. The crowd fell silent, heads turned. A man stood at the edge of the square, and Lena's breath caught in her throat. He was tall, taller than anyone else in the crowd, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. His clothes were rough leather and homespun wool, the kind of practical garments worn by men who lived beyond civilization's reach. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but Lena could see the hard line of his jaw, scarred and weathered. A rifle rested easy in the crook of his arm, not threatening, just present. Mountain man. The words whispered through the crowd like wind through leaves. I'm sorry, sir, Grant said, recovering his composure with visible effort. I don't believe I caught your name. You didn't. The man moved forward, his boots making no sound on the packed earth. 150, that's my bid. Martin's eyes narrowed. The current bid is 90, friend. You're welcome to participate, but perhaps you don't understand how an auction. I understand fine. Yeesh. The man's gaze, when it lifted to the platform, was the color of winter ice. I'm saying $150. Cash. Right now. That enough to settle this? Grant fumbled with his ledger, visibly flustered. Well, the procedures state that bidding should continue until $347.62. The mountain man's voice remained level, almost bored. That's the total debt, isn't it? How did you... Martin started. I can hear. The man reached into his coat and produced a leather pouch that clinked with unmistakable weight. $347.62, paid in full. He tossed the pouch onto the platform. It landed with a heavy thud at Grant's feet. The auctioneer bent to retrieve it with trembling fingers, loosening the drawstring to peer inside. His eyes went wide. It's all here, Grant breathed. Every cent. The crowd erupted in murmurs. This wasn't how these things went. Auctions were supposed to be drawn-out affairs, competitive and entertaining. This stranger had just ended the whole spectacle with a single bid that exceeded the total debt. Martin's face had gone red. Now see here. There are procedures, legalities that must be observed. The debt is paid. The mountain man's gaze never wavered. That makes her free. Unless you're saying the law doesn't apply when it's inconvenient. It was masterfully done. Martin Cross might be corrupt, but he was corrupt within the system. To openly reject payment of the full debt would be to admit that this had never been about the money at all. Grant cleared his throat. Technically, if the debt is paid in full, then yes, the contract would be... That is to say, Miss Cross would be... He looked to Martin for guidance. Martin's jaw worked, fury and calculation warring in his expression. Finally, he forced a smile. Of course. The law is the law. The debt is satisfied and my niece is free to go. He turned to Lena, his voice dropping to a murmur only she could hear. For now. The threat was unmistakable, but Lena barely heard it. Her eyes were locked on the stranger who had just paid a fortune for what? What did he want? What was the catch? Miss Cross. The mountain man's voice drew her attention. He'd moved to the base of the platform, looking up at her with eyes that gave away nothing. You're free to go wherever you please. No obligations, no debts. That's the end of it. Lena stared at him, uncomprehending. Why would you? Doesn't matter why. He turned to leave, clearly considering the matter settled. Wait. The word burst from her before she could think better of it. He paused, looking back over his shoulder. Lena's mind raced. Free to go where? Back to the cabin that was no longer hers? To the town that had just tried to sell her like property? To her uncle, who'd threatened her even in victory? She looked at the crowd, at their disappointed faces, robbed of their entertainment, at Mrs. McCready's disapproval, at Martin's barely concealed rage. Then she looked at the mountains. Can I come with you? The words felt like jumping off a cliff. Wherever you're going, can I come with you? No. The answer was immediate, flat, final. Please. She descended the platform steps, moving toward him with a desperation that she didn't bother to hide. I have nowhere else to go. I can work. You don't know me. His voice was hard as granite. You don't know where I live or what I do. You don't know what you'd be walking into. I know this town just tried to sell me, Lena shot back, surprised by her own boldness. I know my uncle will find another way to control me the second you're gone. I know that free doesn't mean anything here if you're a woman with no money and no protection. Something flickered in his expression, recognition, maybe, or respect. You'd be trading one unknown for another, he said quietly. At least it would be my choice. She met his eyes, refusing to look away. Please. I'm asking for a chance. Just a chance. The mountain man studied her for a long moment. The crowd had gone quiet again, watching this unexpected drama unfold. Finally, he let out a breath that might have been a sigh. I leave in an hour. I won't wait. If you can't keep up, I won't slow down. If you change your mind halfway, you'll be on your own. Understand? It wasn't an acceptance, it was a warning, but it was also the closest thing to hope Lena had felt in months. I understand, she said. He nodded once, then turned and walked away without another word, the crowd parting before him like water around stone. Lena stood frozen, her heart pounding, her mind reeling. What had she just done? You stupid, stupid girl. Martin's hand clamped on her shoulder, spinning her around. His face was inches from hers, his breath hot with rage barely controlled. You think you can just walk away? He hissed. You think some mountain savage is going to protect you? I own half this town, Lena. Your father's debts might be paid, but you still have obligations. Family obligations. Let go of me. Lena tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. You'll come crawling back, Martin promised, and when you do, there won't be anyone to save you. I'll make sure. She said, let go. The voice came from behind Martin. The mountain man had stopped at the edge of the square, one hand resting casually on his rifle. Martin's face went white. He released Lena and stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. Just talking to family. No harm meant? 1 hour, the mountain man said to Lena, ignoring Martin entirely. Then he was gone, disappearing into the morning crowd. Lena stood there, shaking, as the square slowly emptied. The show was over. The disappointed townspeople drifted back to their lives, already spinning this morning's events into gossip and speculation. Mrs. McCready approached, her expression unreadable. You're really going with him? You don't know the first thing about that man. I know he paid to set me free, Lena replied. That's more than anyone else in this town did. Freedom. The older woman shook her head. You think that's what this is? Child, men don't pay that kind of money without expecting something in return. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Then I'll deal with it when it comes. Lena straightened her shoulders, feeling something hard and bright crystallizing in her chest. Fear, yes, but also defiance, also determination. Right now, I have an hour to pack whatever life I have left. So if you'll excuse me. She walked away from the platform, from her uncle's glare, from the whispers that followed her like ghosts. She had 1 hour to prepare for a journey into the unknown, with a stranger who'd saved her for reasons she couldn't begin to guess. 1 hour to say goodbye to everything she'd ever known. 1 hour until her real life began. Matt. Lena owned almost nothing, which made packing mercifully quick. The cabin where she and her father had lived was no longer hers. Martin had claimed it along with everything else. But he'd permitted her to collect personal effects, which amounted to a change of clothes, a photograph of her mother who died when Lena was 6, and a small leather journal half filled with her father's cramped handwriting. She stood in the doorway one last time, looking at the space that held every memory of her childhood. The hearth where her father had taught her to make cornbread. The corner where she'd slept, dreaming of a future that looked nothing like this. The table where they'd eaten countless meals before the whiskey made him forget to come home for dinner. Goodbye, she whispered to the empty room. No one answered. Outside, she'd assembled what she hoped was enough for mountain travel. Her warmest dress, a woolen shawl, sturdy boots that were only slightly too large, and a canteen she'd purchased with the last pennies in her pocket. It wasn't much. It probably wasn't enough. But it was all she had. The mountain man was waiting at the northern edge of town, exactly where he'd said he'd be. He sat astride a massive gray horse, with a pack mule trailing behind carrying supplies. When he saw her approach, he didn't smile or offer greeting, just gave a curt nod. You came? He observed. I said I would. People say a lot of things. He gestured to a smaller mare beside him, already saddled. You know how to ride? A little. Lena had ridden exactly 3 times in her life, all of them years ago. I can learn. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his scarred face. You'll have to. It's 2 days to my place, and we're not walking. Lena approached the mare cautiously. The horse eyed her with what seemed like skepticism, but allowed her to place a foot in the stirrup and haul herself into the saddle. She settled awkwardly, gripping the reins too tight. Ease up, the mountain man said. Horse can feel your fear, makes her nervous. Lena forced her fingers to relax slightly. The mare shifted beneath her, testing this new rider's balance. What's your name? The question came out more abrupt than Lena intended. The man was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Ethan Hale. I'm Lena Cross. I know. He turned his horse north toward the mountains. Try to keep up. They rode. The first hour was agony. Lena's thighs screamed in protest at the unfamiliar position. Her back ached from trying to maintain balance, and every jolt sent sharp pains through her spine. But she gritted her teeth and said nothing, determined not to prove everyone in Timber Hollow right about her weakness. Ethan set a steady pace, neither fast enough to lose her, nor slow enough to be considered gentle. He didn't speak, didn't look back to check on her, just moved forward with the kind of relentless purpose that suggested he'd walk into hell itself without breaking stride. They climbed steadily, the town falling away behind them until it was just a smudge of smoke against the valley floor. The mountains rose ahead, massive and indifferent, their peaks already dusted with early snow. This was real. This was actually happening. Lena was leaving everything she'd ever known to follow a stranger into the wilderness. The terror of that realization warred with something else, something that felt dangerously close to exhilaration. By the time the sun reached its zenith, they'd entered the forest proper. Pine trees closed in around them, their branches filtering the light into golden shafts that painted the forest floor. The air grew cooler, cleaner, carrying scents of earth and sap and growing things. Ethan finally called a halt near a small stream. "Water the horses. Rest. We've got another 6 hours before we make camp." Lena slid from the saddle and nearly collapsed as her legs refused to support her weight. She caught herself against the mare's flank, breathing hard. "Hurts," Ethan observed. It wasn't a question. "I'm fine," Lena lied. "You're not. But you will be." He pulled jerky and hardtack from his pack, offering her a portion. "Eat. You'll need the strength." They ate in silence, the only sounds the babbling stream and the horses drinking their fill. Lena wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where they were going, what his life was like, why he'd really paid for her freedom, but exhaustion had stolen her voice. "Why did you do it?" The question slipped out anyway, quiet and raw. Ethan didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I knew a girl once. Long time ago. Different circumstances, same outcome." His voice was flat, emotionless. Nobody stepped in. Nobody paid. She didn't have a choice. "What happened to her?" "She died." He stood, ending the conversation with brutal finality. 5 minutes. Then we ride." Lena watched him move to check the horses' saddles, his movements efficient and practiced. A girl who died. A past he didn't want to discuss. And beneath his hard exterior, maybe, just maybe, a conscience that couldn't stand by and watch history repeat itself. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't even reassurance. But it was something, a glimpse of humanity beneath the stone. They rode on. The afternoon stretched into evening, the forest growing darker as the sun slipped toward the horizon. Lena's entire body had progressed from pain into a numb, distant ache. She clung to the saddle, focusing only on the rhythm of the horse's gait, on keeping herself upright for one more minute, then another. Just when she thought she couldn't endure another second, Ethan raised a hand. "We'll camp here." They'd reached a small clearing beside a rocky outcropping that would provide shelter from the wind. Ethan dismounted with practiced ease and began unpacking supplies with the efficiency of a man who'd made camp 1,000 times before. Lena tried to copy him, but her legs buckled the moment her feet hit the ground. She went down hard, catching herself on her hands in the dirt. "Easy." Ethan was there suddenly, one hand under her elbow, helping her up with surprising gentleness. First day's always the hardest. "I can help," Lena insisted, even as her muscles trembled with exhaustion. You can sit." He guided her to a fallen log near where he'd begun assembling a fire pit. "Tomorrow you help. Tonight you rest." She wanted to argue, to prove she wasn't useless, but her body had other ideas. She sank onto the log and watched as Ethan transformed the clearing into a functioning campsite with remarkable speed. Fire pit dug and lined with stones. Bedrolls laid out a careful distance from the flames. Horses unsaddled and hobbled where they could graze. A pot of water set to boil for what smelled like coffee. He moved without wasted motion, without hesitation, each action flowing into the next. This was a man who'd lived alone for a long time, Lena realized. A man who'd learned to rely on no one but himself. "Why do you live up here?" she asked when he'd settled across the fire from her, 2 tin cups of coffee steaming between them. "Alone, I mean." Ethan took a long drink before answering. Tried living in towns, didn't take. Because of what happened to that girl? His eyes met hers over the flames, and something in his expression made her wish she could take the question back. Because of what I did after, he said quietly. What happened to the man responsible? The implication hung heavy in the smoke-thick air. Lena should have been afraid, should have been terrified of this confession from a man she didn't know, miles from any help. But she wasn't. Did he deserve it? She asked instead. Ethan's smile was bitter. I thought so. Law disagreed, so I came here, where the law doesn't reach. They sat in silence after that, drinking bitter coffee under a sky so full of stars it seemed impossible they were looking at the same heaven that hung over Timber Hollow. Everything felt different here. The air, the sounds, the weight of the world on Lena's shoulders. You should sleep, Ethan said eventually. Long day tomorrow. What about you? I'll take first watch. He added another log to the fire. Always take first watch. Lena wanted to ask what he was watching for, but exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow. She crawled into the bedroll he'd laid out, the blankets rough but warm, and let her eyes drift shut. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that she'd made it through day one. However many more there were, she'd face them when they came. Morning arrived with the birdsong and the smell of frying bacon. Lena woke to find Ethan already up, the fire rebuilt, coffee brewing, and something sizzling in a cast-iron pan that made her stomach growl with shameless hunger. Up, he said without looking at her. Food's ready. Every muscle in her body screamed as she sat up. She felt like she'd been trampled by a herd of cattle, then put back together by someone who'd forgotten how bodies were supposed to work. Ethan handed her a tin plate loaded with bacon, beans, and a hunk of cornbread. Eat. We've got another full day ahead. The food was simple but delicious, and Lena devoured it with the kind of appetite she hadn't felt in months. Funny how being sold at auction and fleeing into the wilderness could restore a girl's hunger. How long have you lived up here? She asked between bites. 8 years, give or take. Alone the whole time? Mostly. He cleaned his plate with a piece of cornbread. Get trappers passing through sometimes. The occasional prospector who's lost his way. But yeah, mostly alone. Don't you get lonely? Ethan's pause was answer enough. Loneliness is better than the alternative. Which is? People. He said it with such finality that Lena almost laughed. They broke camp with the same efficiency as the night before, except this time Ethan explained what he was doing as he did it. How to pack a mule so the weight distributed evenly. How to check a horse's hooves for stones before saddling up. How to read the sky for weather signs. Lena absorbed it all, grateful for the distraction from her aching body. The second day's ride was, if possible, worse than the first. Her muscles, having stiffened overnight, protested every movement with renewed vigor. But she gritted her teeth and kept pace, determined not to slow them down. The terrain grew steeper as they climbed higher into the mountains. The trail, if it could even be called that, was little more than a deer path winding between massive pines and granite outcroppings. In some places, it narrowed so much that Lena could reach out and touch the rock face on one side, and empty air on the other. She tried very hard not to look down. Almost there, Ethan said as the afternoon sun began its descent. Another hour, maybe less. True to his word, they crested a final ridge just as the sun touched the western peaks. And there, nestled in a small valley ringed by mountains, was Ethan's home. It wasn't what Lena had expected. The cabin was solidly built from hewn logs, with a stone chimney rising from one end and a covered porch facing south. Behind it stood a sturdy barn and what looked like a smokehouse. A stream ran along the eastern edge of the property, and beyond that, a meadow that probably turned green in summer. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was well maintained and clearly built by someone who knew what they were doing, someone who'd planned to stay. Home, Ethan said, and something in his voice softened just slightly on the word. They rode down into the valley as dusk painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. Chickens scattered as they approached, and Lena spotted a vegetable garden, dormant now, beside the cabin. Ethan had built himself a life up here. A real life. Barn first, he said, dismounting. Horses need tending before we do. Lena followed his example, helping, or trying to help, as he unsaddled the animals, brushed them down, and saw them settled with feed and fresh water. Her movements were clumsy with exhaustion, but Ethan didn't criticize, just corrected when she did something wrong. By the time they finished, full darkness had fallen, and Lena could barely keep her eyes open. "Inside," Ethan ordered, grabbing packs from the mule. "I'll show you where things are." The cabin's interior was sparse but functional. One large room served as kitchen and living space, with a loft above that held a bed and storage. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, already laid with kindling waiting to be lit. Shelves held supplies: flour, salt, coffee, ammunition. Hooks on the wall displayed various tools and a rifle. It was clean, organized, the home of a man who'd long ago learned that disorder could kill you in the wilderness. "You'll sleep in the loft," Ethan said, lighting a lamp. "I'll take the floor by the fire." "I couldn't. You shouldn't have to." "It's decided." He cut her off with that same flat finality. "You're a guest here. You'll take the bed." "Guest." The word struck Lena as almost absurd. She'd expected. What? To be put to work immediately? To be told her place in whatever arrangement this was? Instead, Ethan was treating her like she was visiting relatives, not like a woman he'd paid a fortune to free from auction. "Tomorrow we'll talk about how this works," he continued, building a fire with practiced efficiency. "What you need to learn, what I expect, how long you plan to stay. Tonight, you sleep. That's all." Lena climbed the ladder to the loft, her exhausted mind trying to process everything that had happened in the past 48 hours. Sold at auction. Freed by a stranger. Led into the mountains. Brought to a cabin that felt more like home than anywhere she'd lived in years. The bed was simple, a wooden frame with a mattress stuffed with pine needles and topped with thick wool blankets. But to Lena's battered body, it felt like the finest hotel. She collapsed onto it without even removing her boots, asleep before her head fully settled on the pillow. The next few days passed in a blur of learning and aching muscles. Ethan woke before dawn each morning, and after the first day, so did Lena. There was always work to be done: animals to feed, water to haul, wood to chop, meals to prepare. In town, Lena had survived doing odd jobs for pennies. Here, survival was the job, and it demanded everything. But Ethan was a patient teacher, if not a particularly talkative one. He showed her how to split logs properly so she didn't waste energy, how to collect eggs without frightening the chickens, how to butcher meat and preserve it in salt, how to read the weather in the morning sky and plan the day's work accordingly. "Why are you teaching me all this?" Lena asked on the fourth morning as they worked to repair a section of the barn roof that had sustained storm damage. Ethan hammered another nail before answering. "Because winter's coming. You need to know how to survive up here if you plan to stay. And if you don't plan to stay, you still need to know how to survive long enough to leave. And if I do stay?" He paused, looking at her directly for the first time all morning. "Then you'll need to know twice as much. This isn't a town, Lena. There's no doctor if you get sick. No store if we run out of supplies. No law if something goes wrong. Everything up here is earned: your food, your warmth, your safety, all of it." It should have been terrifying. Maybe it was. But it was also honest in a way nothing in Timber Hollow had ever been. "Then teach me," Lena said. "I want to learn." Something flickered in Ethan's expression, approval maybe, or respect. He returned to his hammering. "All right then. First lesson. Never use 3 nails when 2 will do. We don't have unlimited supplies, and the nearest town is 2 days' ride." They worked in companionable silence after that, the rhythm of hammer on nail punctuating the mountain quiet. By the end of the first week, Lena could saddle her own horse, start a fire in under 5 minutes, and prepare a basic meal without burning it. Her hands had begun to develop calluses from the axe handle, and her muscles, while still protesting, no longer screamed quite so loudly. She was getting stronger, but more than that, she was getting braver. It happened in small moments. The first time she successfully split a log on her own and felt a rush of pride instead of just relief. The morning she woke before Ethan and had coffee ready when he came down from his own sleeping area. The afternoon she spotted wolf tracks near the chicken coop and brought Ethan the rifle without being asked. Each tiny victory built on the last, constructing something new inside her. Something that felt dangerously close to confidence. On the 8th day, as they sat on the porch after supper watching the sunset behind the western peaks, Lena finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind since that first day. Why did you really do it? Pay my debt? Ethan was quiet for so long she thought he'd ignore the question entirely. Then, I told you, I knew someone once. That's not all of it. Lena kept her voice gentle but firm. $300 is more than most men see in a lifetime. You could have walked away, should have walked away. But you didn't. The silence stretched. A night bird called from the forest. The stream whispered its endless song. My sister, Ethan said finally, his voice so low Lena had to lean in to hear. Her name was Sarah. She was 16 when our father died and left debts. Different town, same story. She was sold to a man who... He stopped, his jaw working. She lasted 2 years. Then she took a rope into the barn and didn't come out. Lena's breath caught. Ethan, I was 19, working in a logging camp 3 states away, sending money home when I could. By the time I heard what happened, by the time I got back, she'd been in the ground for months. His hands gripped the porch railing hard enough that his knuckles went white. The man who bought her contract was wealthy, respected. No one would testify against him. The law said it was a tragedy, but not a crime. What did you do? Ethan's smile was terrible. I made it a crime. Caught him alone on a road outside town. Beat him until he stopped moving. Would have killed him. Probably should have, but someone came along. They arrested me instead. I spent a year in prison, and when I got out, I came here. Been here ever since. The pieces fell into place. The isolation, the silence, the way he moved through the world like a man who'd learned to trust nothing and no one. I'm sorry, Lena whispered. Don't be sorry. Be ready. He turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the last light of day. Because your uncle isn't going to let this go. Men like him never do. He'll come for you, Lena. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but he'll come. Let him. The words came out harder than Lena intended, sharp with a fury she'd been swallowing for years. I'm not that scared girl on the auction block anymore. No, Ethan agreed, studying her face in the dimming light. No, you're not. That night, lying in the loft while the wind whispered through the pines, Lena thought about the woman she'd been just 8 days ago. Broken. Defeated. Ready to accept whatever fate the auction block decided for her. That woman was gone. In her place was someone new, someone harder. Someone who'd learned that survival wasn't given, it was taken, every single day, in 1,000 small acts of defiance against a world that wanted to break you. Somewhere below, Ethan moved about the cabin, banking the fire for the night, and Lena realized she wasn't afraid of him anymore. Wasn't afraid of the mountains, or the winter coming, or the hard work that made her muscles scream. She was afraid of only one thing now, going back. And she'd die before she let that happen. The mountains had claimed her, changed her, made her into something new. And when her uncle came, because Ethan was right, he would come. She would be ready, not as victim, not as property, not as someone to be bought and sold and broken, but as herself, whoever that turned out to be. Winter's first warning arrived 3 weeks after Lena came to the mountain. She woke to find the world transformed, every surface draped in white silence. Snow had fallen during the night, not the gentle dusting she remembered from Timber Hollow winters, but a thick blanket that buried the meadow and bent the pine branches low under its weight. Ethan was already up, stoking the fire to a roar that pushed back the cold creeping through the cabin walls. Get dressed warm, he said without preamble. We've got work. The work, it turned out, was everything. Checking the barn for roof damage, breaking ice on the water trough so the horses could drink, hauling extra firewood from the stack beside the smokehouse, spreading feed for the chickens, who huddled together in their coop looking affronted by the weather's betrayal. By mid-morning, Lena's fingers were numb despite the gloves Ethan had given her, and her breath came in white plumes that vanished into the crystalline air. This is just the beginning, Ethan said as they paused to rest on the porch, stamping snow from their boots. Real winter hasn't even started yet. When it does, we'll be snowed in for weeks at a time, maybe months. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, Lena felt a strange thrill of anticipation. Months cut off from the world. Months where no one from Timber Hollow could reach her. Months of nothing but survival and silence and the slow, steady work of becoming someone new. Then we'd better make sure we're ready, she said. Something like approval flickered across Ethan's weathered face. Come on, I'll show you the root cellar. You need to know where everything is stored. The root cellar was built into the hillside behind the cabin, its entrance hidden beneath a heavy wooden door covered in sod. Inside, the temperature dropped 10 degrees, cold enough to preserve food but not freeze it. Shelves lined the walls, laden with jarred vegetables, smoked meat, sacks of flour and cornmeal, barrels of salt and sugar. This has to last us until spring thaw, Ethan explained, his voice echoing in the earthen space. Maybe longer if the winter runs hard. So we don't waste. We don't take more than we need, and we keep careful inventory. Lena studied the supplies with new eyes. In town, food had come from the general store, purchased with pennies carefully hoarded. Here, food was life itself, measured and rationed against the killing cold. I understand, she said. They emerged back into the white world to find fresh snow beginning to fall, fat flakes drifting down like ash from a distant fire. Storm's coming, Ethan observed, reading something in the sky that Lena couldn't yet see. Big one. We need to finish the outside work now. They spent the next 2 hours in frantic preparation, reinforcing the chicken coop against the wind, stringing a rope between the cabin and the barn so they could find their way in a whiteout, stacking extra wood on the porch where it would stay accessible even under deep snow. By the time they finished, the wind had picked up, driving the snow sideways and reducing visibility to a few yards. Inside, Ethan commanded. We're done for the day. The cabin felt like a sanctuary after the biting cold. Ethan built the fire higher while Lena prepared a stew from dried venison and root vegetables, the skills he'd taught her over the past weeks flowing naturally now. Outside, the wind began to howl. How long will it last? Lena asked as they ate, the storm rattling the shutters like something alive trying to get in. 2 days, maybe 3. Ethan sopped up stew with a chunk of bread. We'll stay inside, keep the fire going, wait it out. Long as the chimney doesn't block and the roof holds, we'll be fine. The casual way he said it, long as the roof holds, sent a chill through Lena that had nothing to do with the temperature. And if it doesn't hold, then we fix it. Ethan met her eyes across the table. Or we die. That's how it works up here. No middle ground. That night, as the storm raged outside with the fury of something personal, Lena lay in the loft listening to the wind try to tear the world apart. The cabin groaned and creaked, every board protesting, but it held. Held because Ethan had built it right. Held because he'd spent years preparing for exactly this. She wondered what it must be like to live with such constant awareness of death. To know that every decision, every preparation, every moment of carelessness could be the difference between survival and frozen corpse. And she wondered if she was strong enough to live that way. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of nothing but wind and snow and the constant roar of nature's indifference. 3 days trapped inside the cabin with Ethan, learning to navigate the strange intimacy of shared survival. He wasn't much for conversation, but Lena discovered he was willing to teach. When the work was done and the long evening hours stretched ahead, he showed her how to maintain the rifles, how to sharpen knives to a razor edge, how to read the burn pattern of different woods in the fire. Why do you need so many guns? Lena asked on the second night, watching him clean a rifle with the kind of reverence some men reserved for prayer. Bears, Ethan said simply. Mountain lions, wolves. Men, sometimes, though they're usually the most dangerous. He sighted down the barrel, checking for true. A gun that jams when you need it is worse than no gun at all, so you maintain them. Every day. Have you ever had to shoot someone? The question hung in the air between them. Outside, the wind screamed. Yes, Ethan said, finally. Because of your sister? Because a man came up here thinking he could take what wasn't his. Ethan set the rifle aside and began working on a pistol. I gave him warning. He didn't listen, so I made sure he couldn't try again. Did you kill him? No? Ethan's hands moved with mechanical precision, disassembling the weapon. But he walked with a limp after, and he spread the word. The mountain man doesn't share. Lena absorbed this, understanding the message beneath the words. Ethan had built himself a reputation for violence, not because he enjoyed it, but because it kept him safe. Fear was its own kind of fortress. "Is that what you'll do if my uncle comes?" she asked quietly. Ethan's hands stilled. He looked at her directly, his winter sky eyes unreadable. "Your uncle won't come alone. He'll bring the law, or men pretending to be the law. He'll have papers, claims, arguments that sound legitimate to people who don't know better. So what do? We prepare. And when he comes, you decide how you want to face him." Ethan resumed his work. "Because it'll be your choice, Lena, not mine. I can stand beside you, but I can't fight your battles for you. That's not how this works." The words should have felt like abandonment. Instead, they felt like trust. On the third day, the storm broke. Lena woke to silence so profound it seemed unnatural after days of constant noise. She climbed down from the loft to find Ethan already opening the shutters, revealing a world transformed. Snow had buried everything. The meadow was gone, replaced by an unbroken white expanse. Drifts reached halfway up the cabin walls. The barn was barely visible, just the peak of its roof jutting above the white like a shipwreck. "We'll need to dig out," Ethan said. "Start with a path to the barn. Animals need tending." It took them most of the morning to shovel a trench through snow that came up to Lena's waist in places. Her back screamed, her shoulders burned, but she kept digging, matching Ethan's steady rhythm. The horses whinnied with relief when they finally broke through to the barn. The chickens had survived, huddled together for warmth. Everything had held. "Good work," Ethan said, and those two words felt like a medal of honor. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. More snow came, then more, each storm adding to the white siege that cut them off from the world below. But inside the cabin, life found its rhythm. Lena grew stronger with each passing day. The calluses on her hands thickened. The muscles in her arms and back, forged by constant labor, stopped aching and started responding with eager efficiency. She could split logs now, without Ethan's supervision, could handle the axe with confidence instead of fear. But it wasn't just physical strength she was building. One morning, about 6 weeks after arriving at the mountain, Lena woke before dawn with a strange urgency thrumming through her veins. She dressed quickly and climbed down to find Ethan already at the table, cleaning his hunting rifle. "I want to learn to shoot," she said. Ethan looked up, studying her face. Whatever he saw there made him nod. "All right, finish your breakfast. We'll start today." They went out after the morning chores, trudging through snow to a clearing where Ethan had set up a makeshift range using logs and old cans. "First rule," he said, handing her the rifle. "Never point a gun at anything you don't intend to destroy. Second rule, always assume it's loaded. Third rule, respect what it can do. This isn't a tool. It's death with a trigger." The rifle was heavier than Lena expected, cold even through her gloves. Ethan showed her how to hold it, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze, not pull, the trigger. "Your target is that can on the left stump," he instructed. "Take your time, control your breathing, fire when you're ready." Lena settled the stock against her shoulder, lined up the sights, and squeezed. The recoil slammed into her shoulder with shocking force, knocking her back a step. The can remained untouched, mocking her from 30 yards away. "Again," Ethan said. She fired again, and again, and again. Can after can stayed stubbornly whole, while her shoulder developed a bruise that would last for weeks. But on her 15th shot, something clicked. The rifle became an extension of her intention instead of a separate thing. She breathed out, squeezed, and the leftmost can exploded in a spray of tin. "There," Ethan said, satisfaction in his voice. "Now you know what it feels like. Do it 999 more times, and you might be competent." Lena grinned, despite the ache in her shoulder. 998, I just got one." "You got lucky. Luck runs out, skill doesn't." But he was almost smiling. "Come on, let's see if you can do it again." They practiced every day after that, weather permitting. Lena learned to shoot the rifle, then the pistol, then the shotgun. She learned to compensate for wind, for distance, for the kick of different weapons. She learned to reload quickly, to clear jams, to maintain her focus, even when her arms trembled with fatigue. And slowly, shot by shot, she learned something more important. She learned she could protect herself. The knowledge changed something fundamental inside her. She was no longer someone who needed saving. She was becoming someone who could do the saving. Winter deepened. The temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid in the cabin overnight, and they had to sleep fully dressed beneath piles of blankets. Game became scarce as animals burrowed deep into dens or migrated to lower ground. The world contracted to the small circle of warmth around the fire, everything beyond reduced to white silence and killing cold. But the cabin held. The supplies held. And Lena held. 2 months into winter, Ethan taught her to set trap lines for rabbits and foxes. They would snowshoe out at dawn, following paths Ethan had marked in the forest, checking each trap and resetting those that had been sprung empty. "Read the tracks," Ethan instructed one morning, pointing to marks in the snow near a trap that held a frozen rabbit. "See how they come from the east? That tells you which way the warren is. You can use that information." Lena studied the delicate prints, learning to distinguish rabbit from squirrel, fox from wolf, the story written in snow by creatures fighting their own battles for survival. "How do you know all this?" she asked as they continued along the trap line. "My father taught me some. The rest I learned by necessity." Ethan knelt to reset a sprung trap, his movements practiced and sure. "When you live alone, you either learn or you die. The mountain doesn't care which. Did you always want this? To live alone up here?" "No." The word came out flat, final. "I wanted what everyone wants. A wife, children, a piece of land to call my own. Regular things." "What happened?" Ethan stood, brushing snow from his knees. "After Sarah died, after I got out of prison, I tried. Found a woman willing to overlook my past. We had plans." He shouldered his pack and started walking again. Then one night, I woke up with my hands around her throat. Dream about Sarah, about the man who killed her. Didn't know where I was, who she was. Just knew I was choking someone. Lena's breath caught. "She lived," Ethan continued, "but she left, and I don't blame her. Realized then that I wasn't fit for gentle company. Wasn't fit for family. So I came here where the only person I could hurt was myself." They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the crunch of their snowshoes on packed powder. "I think you're wrong," Lena said finally. Ethan glanced at her. "About what?" "About not being fit for people. You're teaching me, protecting me. That's not nothing." "That's different. You're—" He stopped himself. "I'm what?" "Temporary," he finished, but something in his voice made Lena think that wasn't the word he'd originally intended. "You'll leave when spring comes, go back to civilization, find a real life." "What if I don't want to?" The question surprised them both. Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Lena, this isn't a life. This is exile. This is penance. You're young. You've got opportunities in Timber Hollow, where everyone watched me get sold and did nothing." Lena's voice rose despite herself. "Where my uncle controls everything and everyone pretends not to notice, that's not opportunity. That's a different kind of prison. Then go somewhere else, California, Oregon, anywhere but here." "Why?" Lena challenged. "Because you've decided you don't deserve company. Because you had a nightmare 8 years ago and decided that meant you had to punish yourself forever. You don't understand. I understand that you're the first person who ever treated me like I mattered." The words burst out of Lena like a dam breaking. "Everyone in that town saw me as a problem to be solved or property to be bought. You saw me as a person worth saving, worth teaching, worth—" She stopped, chest heaving. Ethan's expression was unreadable. Snow had begun to fall again, gentle flakes drifting down between them. "We should finish the trap line," he said quietly. "Storm's coming." He turned and walked away, leaving Lena standing in the snow, her heart hammering, wondering what exactly she'd just confessed. They didn't speak about it again. But something had shifted between them, subtle as the turn of seasons. Ethan started explaining more when he taught her skills, started asking her opinion on decisions about the homestead, and Lena caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression complicated. The cold months crawled by. Christmas came and went unmarked except for a slightly larger portion of dried fruit at dinner. New Year passed in silence. Time lost meaning in the white monotony, each day identical to the last. But Lena was changing. Every day she was becoming someone different, harder, stronger, more certain. The woman who'd stood trembling on that auction block was gone, buried under layers of snow and muscle and hard-won competence. In her place was someone who could survive a mountain winter, someone who could shoot straight and split logs and field dress a rabbit without flinching, someone who was starting to understand what freedom actually meant. It meant waking before dawn because the animals needed feeding, not because someone demanded it. It meant calluses earned through work that mattered. It meant learning skills that could keep you alive instead of just employed. It meant choosing hardship over safety because the hardship was honest and the safety was a lie. 3 months into winter, a warm spell brought a brief thaw. The temperature climbed above freezing for the first time in weeks, and the world dripped with melting snow. "Won't last," Ethan predicted at breakfast. "We'll have cold again before the week's out." But while it lasted, they took advantage. Lena helped Ethan repair fence posts that had been damaged by ice. They hauled fresh water from the stream, filling every barrel and bucket in anticipation of the next freeze. They even managed to hunt, bringing down a young buck that would provide meat for weeks. On the third day of the thaw, while hanging venison in the smokehouse, Lena heard it. Hoofbeats. She froze, knife still in hand, the sound impossibly out of place in their isolated sanctuary. Ethan heard it too. He materialized from the barn, rifle in hand, his face gone hard. "Inside," he ordered quietly. "Now." But now, Lena. She'd learned to recognize that tone. She set down the knife and moved toward the cabin, but not inside. She grabbed her own rifle from where it leaned beside the door, checking the load with the automatic competence Ethan had drilled into her. If someone was coming, she wouldn't hide. The riders came into view a few minutes later, 3 men on horseback, picking their way carefully through the melting snow. Even from a distance, Lena recognized the figure in front. Martin Cross. Her uncle had come. Her hands tightened on the rifle, but her breathing stayed steady. Fear tried to rise in her throat, but something stronger pushed it down. She wasn't the same woman he'd sold. He'd learned that soon enough. The riders stopped at the edge of the property, just beyond the fence line. Martin looked older than Lena remembered, his face harder, his eyes calculating as they swept over the cabin, the barn, searching. Then they found her. "Lena," Martin called out, his voice carrying across the snow. "There you are. I've been so worried." Beside her, Ethan made a sound that might have been a laugh or a growl. "We're on private land," Ethan called back, his rifle held in a casual position that somehow managed to be more threatening than if he'd aimed it directly. "State your business or move on." One of the men flanking Martin, Lena recognized him as Deputy Parsons from Timber Hollow, shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. The third man was a stranger, tall and mean-looking, with a gun belt that suggested he wasn't law enforcement. "My business is with my niece," Martin said, still focusing on Lena. "I've come to take her home." "I am home," Lena called back, surprised by the strength in her own voice. Martin's expression flickered with annoyance before smoothing back to false concern. "Lena, honey, you're not thinking clearly. You've been up here in the cold, isolated, probably frightened. This man," he gestured dismissively at Ethan, "has filled your head with ideas. But it's time to come back to civilization, to family." "You're not my family," Lena said. "Family doesn't sell people." "I saved you from disgrace." Martin's voice rose despite himself. "Your father's debts would have ruined you. I found a legal solution. You found a way to control me," Lena interrupted. "There's a difference." Deputy Parsons cleared his throat. "Miss Cross, your uncle has raised concerns about your welfare. Says you were coerced into leaving Timber Hollow. Says this man here," he nodded at Ethan, "might be holding you against your will." "I'm here of my own choice." "Are you?" Martin's voice dropped into something oily and insinuating. "Or has he convinced you that you have no other options? That's what these mountain men do, Lena. They isolate women, make them dependent, control them." "Like you tried to do?" Lena felt heat rising in her chest, but it wasn't fear. It was fury. "I know what control looks like, Uncle. I lived under it for years. This isn't that." "The law says otherwise." Martin pulled a document from his coat. "I have a writ here, signed by Judge Hendricks, declaring you under my guardianship until such time as you're married or reach the age of 25. As your guardian, I have the right to determine where you live and under what circumstances." Lena's stomach dropped. That's not legal. I'm 22. I'm an adult. In the eyes of the law, an unmarried woman without independent means requires a male guardian. Martin's smile was triumphant. I am that guardian, and I'm here to exercise my legal authority. Deputy Parsons looked uncomfortable, but he nodded. He's right, Miss Cross. The law's on his side. You'll need to come back with us. We can sort everything out proper like in town. No. The word came out flat, certain. It's not optional, Parsons began. I said no. Lena raised her rifle, not quite pointing it at the men, but not pointing it either. I'm not going back to Timber Hollow. Not now. Not ever. Lena, put the gun down, Martin commanded. You're being hysterical. I'm being clear, Lena corrected. This is my home. You're not welcome here. Leave. The third man, the one who wasn't law enforcement, let his hand drift toward his gun belt. Ethan's rifle swung to cover him with a motion so fast and fluid it seemed supernatural. Don't, Ethan said quietly. Really don't. Everyone froze. This is kidnapping, Martin blustered. The law. The law has no authority on my land, Ethan interrupted. And the only kidnapping I see is 3 men trying to force a woman to leave against her will. She's not in her right mind. She sounds perfectly clear to me. Ethan's voice was hard as the mountains themselves. And I'd suggest you listen. The lady said no. That means no. Deputy Parsons shifted in his saddle. Look, we don't want any trouble, but we got a legal writ. We're bound to execute it. Execute it somewhere else, Ethan said. You're not taking her. Then we'll come back with more men, Martin threatened. With federal marshals if necessary. You can't fight the law forever, Mountain Man. Maybe not forever, Ethan agreed. But I can fight it today, and tomorrow, and every day after that. Question is, how many men are you willing to lose to bring in one woman who doesn't want to come? The threat hung heavy in the cold air. The stranger's hand had moved away from his gun belt. Even Martin looked uncertain for the first time. This isn't over, Martin finally said, gathering his reins. I'll be back, Lena. And when I come, it'll be with enough force that your pet savage won't be able to stop me. Looking forward to it, Lena called back, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. The riders turned and disappeared back into the forest, hoofbeats fading into silence. For a long moment, neither Lena nor Ethan moved. Then slowly, Lena lowered her rifle, her hands beginning to shake with delayed reaction. You did good, Ethan said quietly. He's coming back. Lena's voice trembled despite her best efforts. With more men, with the law. Probably. What do we do? Ethan finally lowered his own rifle, his expression thoughtful. We prepare, and we make sure that next time the law understands who's right and who's wrong. How? I don't know yet. He looked at her, his winter eyes intense. But we'll figure it out, together. Together. The word wrapped around Lena like warmth. They spent the rest of the day fortifying the cabin's defenses. Ethan showed Lena the hidden rifle ports he'd built into the walls, disguised so well she'd never noticed them. They moved ammunition to strategic locations throughout the property. They discussed fields of fire and fallback positions with the kind of grim practicality that made Lena's earlier life seem like a distant dream. That night, as they sat by the fire, the weight of what had happened finally settled on Lena's shoulders. He had a legal document, she said quietly, a writ from a judge. What if he's right? What if the law really is on his side? Then the law is wrong. Ethan's answer was immediate, certain. And wrong law doesn't deserve respect. But if he comes back with marshals, then we'll deal with it when it happens. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Lena, listen to me. Your uncle wants to control you, not because he cares about you, but because you represent something. Property, maybe. Or just the principle that he owns what he claims to own. Men like that don't stop because you ask nicely. They stop when stopping is the only option left. So we fight? If we have to. But first we try something smarter. Ethan stood pacing the small cabin. We need to find out what legal ground we actually stand on, and we need leverage. How do we get that from up here? We don't. Ethan stopped pacing, decision crystallizing on his face. I ride to Blackwater Springs, bigger town, 3 days west. They've got a real lawyer there, not just whatever pocket judge your uncle bought. We find out what your actual rights are. We document what happened. We build a case. That means leaving me here alone. For a week, maybe more. Ethan met her eyes. Can you handle that? 3 months ago, the answer would have been no. But 3 months ago, Lena couldn't shoot, couldn't hunt, couldn't survive a day without help. Now? Yes, she said. I can handle it. Ethan studied her face, searching for doubt. He must not have found any, because he nodded. Then I'll leave at first light. There's enough firewood to last 2 weeks if you're careful. Enough food for 3. The trap lines are set. Keep the rifle close. Trust no one. If anyone comes, anyone, you don't open that door, you understand? I understand. I'm serious, Lena. Your uncle might send someone while I'm gone. They'll lie, say they're here to help, say I sent them. Don't believe it. I won't. They spent the rest of the evening preparing. Ethan showed Lena where he'd hidden emergency supplies, a pack with food and ammunition buried in the root cellar in case she needed to run. He made her recite the route to Blackwater Springs until she had it memorized. He checked every gun in the cabin, making sure each one was loaded and ready. You're ready for this, he said as they finally settled in for the night. You know that, right? Lena looked at him, this hard man who'd saved her for reasons he'd never fully explained, who'd taught her to survive not through kindness, but through the kind of brutal honesty that demanded she become stronger or die trying. I know, she said. And she did. Morning came cold and clear. Ethan was packed and mounted before the sun fully cleared the eastern peaks. 1 week, he said from horseback, his breath misting in the freezing air. If I'm not back in 10 days, assume the worst and head west to Blackwater Springs yourself. Follow the route I showed you. You'll be back, Lena said with more confidence than she felt. Probably. He almost smiled. Keep the home fires burning. Then he was gone, his horse disappearing into the forest, leaving Lena alone in the mountains for the first time since she'd arrived. The silence was enormous. Lena stood on the porch, rifle in hand, and looked out at the world of white and green and endless sky. No voices, no crowds, no judgment, just her and the mountain and the challenge of staying alive until Ethan returned. She took a deep breath of air so cold it burned her lungs. Then she went inside to start the day's work. Because that's what survivors did. They survived. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. The first day alone passed in a blur of work that kept Lena's hands busy and her mind from wandering into dark territory. She fed the animals, hauled water, checked the trap lines, and split enough wood to keep the fire burning through 2 nights. Every task Ethan had taught her became a meditation, each swing of the axe or check of a trap a small proof that she could do this, that she wasn't the helpless girl from Timber Hollow anymore. But when darkness fell and she barred the cabin door from the inside, the silence became something alive. Every creak of settling wood made her reach for the rifle. Every gust of wind against the shutters sounded like footsteps. She sat by the fire long into the night, feeding it logs she couldn't afford to waste, because the darkness beyond the firelight felt too vast, too full of possibility. What if Martin came back tonight? What if he'd been waiting for Ethan to leave? What if the stranger with the gun belt was already out there, circling the cabin, looking for a way in? Lena's fingers tightened on the rifle stock. Let him try. She knew every inch of this cabin now. Knew where the rifle ports were, where the ammunition was stored, where Ethan had reinforced the walls, and where they were still vulnerable. She might not win a fight, but she wouldn't go down easy. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it steadied her breathing. She finally climbed to the loft around midnight, fully dressed, the rifle beside her, and fell into a fitful sleep punctuated by dreams of auction blocks and frozen mountains, and Ethan's horse returning without a rider. Morning came as a relief. The second day brought fresh snow, fat flakes that fell straight down in the windless air, muffling the world even further. Lena went through her routine with mechanical efficiency, but the weather made her nervous. If this turned into another big storm, the trap lines would be buried. The path to the barn would need constant clearing. And if something went wrong, if she got hurt or lost in a whiteout, there would be no one to help. She was checking the last trap of the northern line when she heard it again. Hoofbeats. Lena's heart slammed against her ribs. She dropped into a crouch behind a snow-covered boulder, rifle ready, listening hard. The sound was coming from the south, from the direction of Timber Hollow. Multiple horses moving slowly through the deep snow. They were here. She worked her way back toward the cabin through the trees, staying off the main path, using the cover Ethan had taught her to appreciate. Through the falling snow, she could just make out shapes moving near the property line. 4 riders this time, and one of them was definitely Martin. Lena reached the cabin and slipped inside, barring the door and moving immediately to the rifle port that gave the best view of the southern approach. Her hands were steady as she loaded the Winchester, muscle memory taking over where thought would have been too slow. The riders stopped at the fence line, just as they had before. But this time Martin didn't call out greeting. He sat on his horse, staring at the cabin with an expression Lena couldn't read from this distance. Then he gestured, and 2 of the men dismounted. They were carrying something. Tools, Lena realized with growing dread. An axe. A heavy maul. They weren't here to talk. "Miss Cross," one of the men called out, not Martin, but a voice Lena recognized as belonging to Tom Grimsby, the saloon owner who'd bid $75 for her at the auction. "Your uncle's been awful worried about you. We just want to make sure you're all right." Lena stayed silent, watching through the rifle port as the 2 men moved toward the cabin. Martin and the 4th man remained mounted, hanging back. "Come on out now," Grimsby tried again, his voice carrying false cheer. "It's cold out here. Let's talk this through like civilized folk." They were 20 yards from the cabin now, 15. Lena could see Grimsby's face, see the calculation in his eyes that had nothing to do with concern for her welfare. She fired a shot into the snow 3 feet in front of Grimsby's boots. The men froze. The crack of the rifle echoed off the mountains, and in its wake, the falling snow seemed even quieter. "Next one won't be a warning," Lena called out, keeping her voice level despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. "Turn around and leave, now." "Now, Miss Cross, there's no need for violence," Grimsby started. Lena fired again, closer this time. Snow kicked up inches from his feet. "I said leave." Her voice cracked like a whip. "This is private property, and you're not welcome here." Martin finally dismounted, moving forward with his hands raised in a gesture of peace that fooled exactly no one. "Lena, honey, you're clearly not thinking straight. The mountain man has abandoned you here, alone, in the middle of winter. You could die up here. We're just trying to help. Ethan didn't abandon me. He's coming back, and I don't need your help." Lena tracked Martin through the rifle port. "I've got everything I need right here." "Do you?" Martin's voice took on that oily quality she remembered from childhood, the tone he used when he thought he was being clever. "Food? Firewood? Protection? How long do you think you'll last when the real storms come? When the wolves get hungry? When men with worse intentions than ours decide to visit?" "Long enough to shoot anyone who tries to force their way in," Lena replied. "You can't shoot all of us," the 4th man said. He was the stranger from before, the one with the gun belt. "And you can't stay in there forever." Lena shifted her aim to him. "I don't have to shoot all of you, just you. Want to test if I'm a good enough shot?" The man's hand moved toward his pistol, and Lena's finger tightened on the trigger. For a moment, the world balanced on the edge of violence. "Stand down, Carver," Martin ordered. The stranger's hand stilled, but his eyes never left the cabin. Martin turned his attention back to Lena, and his mask of concern finally slipped, revealing the cold fury underneath. "You're making this very difficult, girl. I have a legal document giving me authority over you. I'm trying to be patient, trying to do this the civilized way. But my patience has limits." "So does my ammunition," Lena shot back, but I've got enough to make this real expensive for you. Question is whether you think I'm worth the cost. Your family, I'm property to you, just like my father was property when you cheated him out of his mining shares. Just like this whole town is property to the men with enough money and cruelty to take it." Lena's voice rose despite herself. "Well, I'm not property anymore. I'm a person, and this person is telling you to leave." Martin's face went red. "You ungrateful little—" "5 seconds," Lena interrupted. "Then I start shooting for real. 5, 4, 3. We're leaving." Grimsby grabbed Martin's arm, pulling him back. "Come on, Martin. She's not worth getting shot over." "She's not worth anything, clearly," Martin spat. But he let himself be pulled away, mounting his horse with jerky, furious movements. As the riders retreated, Martin called back one final time. "You think you've won something here, Lena? You think your mountain man is going to save you? He's not coming back. Men like him don't keep promises to women like you. And when you finally understand that, when you're starving and freezing and begging for rescue, I'll remember this. I'll remember how you chose this." Then they were gone, swallowed by the falling snow. Lena stayed at the rifle port for another hour, watching the forest, making sure they were truly gone. Her hands had started shaking the moment the riders disappeared, delayed reaction flooding through her system. She'd done it. She'd faced them down alone and sent them running. But Martin's words echoed in her head. What if Ethan didn't come back? What if something had happened in Blackwater Springs? What if she really was alone up here, with winter deepening and supplies dwindling and no one coming to help? She pushed the thoughts away viciously. Ethan would return. He'd said 1 week, and she trusted him to keep his word. Men like Martin lied constantly. Men like Ethan didn't bother to lie at all. The question was what Martin would do next. The third day brought clarity, if not comfort. Lena woke to find the snow had stopped, leaving the world crystalline and still. She did her morning work with extra vigilance, checking the tree line constantly for signs of watchers, but the forest remained empty, giving away nothing. As she was hauling water from the stream, she noticed something strange. Tracks in the snow leading away from the cabin toward the eastern ridge. Not animal tracks. Boot prints. Someone had been watching the cabin during the night. Lena's blood went cold. She followed the tracks to the ridge, staying alert for ambush, but found nothing except a spot where someone had stood for a long time, trampling the snow flat. From this vantage point, they would have had a clear view of the cabin, the barn, the entire property. Martin was having her watched. Waiting for Ethan to return maybe, or waiting for her to make a mistake, to leave herself vulnerable. She returned to the cabin and made a decision. If they were watching, she'd give them something to see. She went about her work with deliberate visibility, making sure anyone observing would see a woman competent and unafraid. She checked the rifle ports ostentatiously. She practiced shooting, putting 5 rounds through a target at 50 yards with calm precision. The message was clear. Come if you want. I'm ready. But inside, her nerves were stretched wire-tight. How long could she maintain this? How long before exhaustion or accident or simple bad luck gave them the opening they were waiting for? The 4th day brought no visitors, but the temperature dropped so severely that Lena had to break ice on the water trough 3 times. The chickens huddled in their coop, barely moving. The horses stood in the barn with frost forming on their muzzles despite the shelter. Lena burned through firewood at an alarming rate, trying to keep the cabin warm enough to survive. She'd been careful before, rationing the wood. Now survival demanded she use what she needed and hope it was enough. That night, she lay in the loft listening to the cabin timbers groan under the assault of cold and allowed herself a moment of honest fear. This was what Ethan had tried to warn her about. This was what mountain life really meant. Not romance or adventure, but the constant grinding reality of nature trying to kill you, and only your preparation and stubbornness standing between survival and freezing death. She understood now why Ethan was the way he was. Hard, cautious, unwilling to waste anything, trust anyone, or allow softness to creep into decisions, because softness up here was death. The 5th day was when everything changed. Lena was checking the southern trapline when she heard shouting from the direction of the cabin. Male voices, angry and loud, echoing through the frozen forest. She ran. Her snowshoes carried her back toward the property at a pace that would have been impossible 3 months ago. Her lungs burned with cold air, but she didn't slow. The rifle banged against her back with each stride. She burst from the tree line to find Martin and 6 men at her fence line. Not waiting this time. Not negotiating. They had tools, axes, a battering ram fashioned from a log. They were preparing to force their way onto the property. "Stop!" Lena's voice cracked across the clearing like a gunshot. The men turned. Martin's smile was vicious. "There she is. Gentlemen, I believe we've found the disturbed young woman who needs our assistance." "I told you to leave," Lena said, bringing her rifle up to her shoulder. "I meant it. And I told you my patience had limits." Martin gestured to his men. "We're coming in, Lena. We're going to collect you, bring you back to civilization where you belong. You can come peacefully, or we can drag you. Your choice." "Third option," Lena said. "You leave and nobody gets shot." One of the men, a miner Lena recognized from Timber Hollow, laughed. "You gonna shoot all of us, girl? There's 7 of us and 1 of you." I only need to shoot one, Lena replied, her aim never wavering from Martin's chest. Want to guess which one? Martin's confidence flickered. You wouldn't dare. Shooting me would be murder. They'd hang you. Maybe, but you'd still be dead. Lena's finger rested on the trigger. And I'm starting to think that might be worth it. The words came out harder than she'd intended, cold as the mountain winter. And in that moment, Lena realized she meant them. She would shoot Martin Cross if he tried to take her, would kill him if necessary, would accept whatever consequences came after, because going back was not an option. Death was not an option. Only forward, only free. The realization must have shown on her face because Martin took an involuntary step backward. You're insane, he breathed. No, Lena corrected. I'm done. Done being afraid. Done being controlled. Done letting men like you decide what my life is worth. She worked the rifle's lever, chambering around with a sound that carried deadly finality. Last chance, Uncle. Turn around and leave, or find out exactly how done I am. For a long moment, no one moved. The world held its breath. Then Martin raised his hand and Lena knew what was coming. She saw it in his eyes, in the set of his shoulders. He was going to order them forward, was going to call her bluff, was going to force her to choose between surrender and murder. Take her, Martin started. The gunshot wasn't Lena's. It came from the forest, high-powered and unmistakable, kicking up snow between Martin's horse and the nearest man. Everyone froze. Ethan emerged from the trees, mounted and with his rifle still smoking. He looked like something out of a nightmare, hard-eyed and winter-worn, every inch the dangerous man Martin had tried to dismiss. You're on my land, Ethan said quietly. Leave. We have legal authority, Martin started. You have nothing. Ethan urged his horse forward, stopping beside Lena. His presence felt like a fortress wall suddenly appearing at her back. I've been to Blackwater Springs, talked to a real lawyer. Turns out that writ you're waving around, it's not worth the paper it's printed on. He pulled a document from his coat and tossed it toward Martin. It landed in the snow between them. That's a statement from Judge Morrison in Blackwater Springs. He says your Judge Hendricks has no jurisdiction to issue guardianship writs for adults. Says the whole thing is invalid. Says if you try to force compliance, it's kidnapping under territorial law. Ethan's smile was sharp enough to cut. He was real interested to hear about a small-town mining boss using corrupted legal documents to claim authority over young women. Real interested. Martin's face had gone white. You're lying. Read it yourself. Ethan's rifle stayed trained on the group. Or don't. Doesn't matter to me. What matters is that you're trespassing on private land, threatening a resident with illegal detention. I'd be within my rights to shoot you where you stand. Deputy Parsons, who'd been hanging back, finally spoke up. Martin, if what he's saying is true, it's not true. It can't be. It is. Lena's voice was steady now, strengthened by Ethan's return. And you know it is. You knew that writ was worthless when you got it. You counted on me being too scared to fight back, too isolated to find out the truth. You counted wrong, Ethan added. The men were looking at each other now, uncertainty spreading through the group like frost. They'd come expecting an easy job, collect one frightened woman, get paid, go home. They hadn't signed on for a legal fight that could see them prosecuted. Martin sensed his support crumbling. I'm still her family. I have responsibilities. You have nothing, Lena interrupted. No authority, no claim, no power over me ever again. She stepped forward, and the men actually stepped back. Lena Cross, who 3 months ago couldn't look her uncle in the eye, now advanced on him like judgment itself. You sold me, she said, her voice carrying across the frozen clearing. You took my father's death and turned it into profit. You claimed you were helping me, but all you wanted was control. Control over his mining shares that should have been mine. Control over the cabin. Control over me. That's not... It is. The words tore out of her. I know you cheated him. I know you arranged those debts. I know you made sure he'd lose everything so you could swoop in and claim it all. Well, you can have the cabin. You can have the shares. You can have every piece of property my father left behind. But you cannot have me. Martin's face twisted with rage. You ungrateful. The only thing I'm grateful for, Lena cut him off, is that you showed me exactly what you are. Because now I know, and I'll never forget. She raised her rifle again, this time with zero hesitation. Get off this mountain. Don't come back. If I ever see you again, I won't warn you. I won't hesitate. I will shoot you and sleep just fine afterward. Do you understand me? Martin stared at her, and Lena saw the moment he truly understood. She wasn't bluffing, wasn't posturing. The woman he'd tried to control was gone, replaced by someone who would kill to stay free. You'll regret this, he said, but there was no power in it anymore. Just empty threat from a man who'd lost. No, Lena said. I really won't. Ethan fired another shot over the men's heads, making them flinch. She told you to leave, he said. I suggest you listen. They left. Lena watched them retreat through the forest, watched until the last man disappeared into the trees, and the sound of hoofbeats faded into nothing. Only then did she lower her rifle. Only then did the shaking start. Ethan was off his horse in an instant, steadying her with a hand on her shoulder. Easy, he said. You're all right. You did good. I almost shot him, Lena whispered. I was going to shoot him. I know. I meant it. I would have... I know, Ethan repeated, gentler this time. But you didn't have to. That's what matters. Lena looked up at him, this hard man who'd ridden through winter storms to get her the legal protection she needed, who'd returned exactly when he said he would, arriving at the perfect moment like something out of a story. You came back, she said, hating how her voice wobbled. I said I would. Martin said you wouldn't, said men like you don't keep promises to women like me. Ethan's expression went hard again. Martin Cross is a liar and a coward. Don't give his words any weight. But you came back, Lena said again, needing him to understand what that meant. You didn't have to. You'd already paid my debt. You could have just stayed in Blackwater Springs, started a new life. This is my life, Ethan interrupted. He gestured to the cabin, the mountains, the frozen wilderness. This, here, and you're part of it now if you want to be. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. What if I do want to be? Lena asked quietly. Ethan studied her face for a long moment. Then we have work to do. That statement from Judge Morrison? It's good, but it's not ironclad. Martin could appeal, could find another corrupt judge, could come back with different leverage. So what do? We build a real legal case. We get your father's original contracts and prove Martin's fraud. We establish your claim to the mining shares. We make you financially independent so no judge anywhere can claim you need a guardian. Ethan's voice was matter-of-fact, laying out strategy like a battle plan. And we do it before spring, while the snow keeps Martin trapped in town. How? I found someone in Blackwater Springs, a lawyer named Elizabeth Cartwright. She specializes in cases like yours, women trapped by corrupt guardianship laws. She's willing to take your case, but she needs documentation, evidence. Which is all in Timber Hollow, Lena said, seeing the problem immediately. In Martin's office, probably, along with your father's original mining contracts. Ethan's jaw set. We need to get them. That's impossible. We can't just walk into town and steal from Martin's office. Not steal, retrieve what's rightfully yours. Ethan moved toward the cabin, motioning for her to follow. And we won't do it in daylight. We'll do it smart. Inside, warmth wrapped around them like a blessing. Ethan went to the fire while Lena put coffee on to boil, both of them settling into the familiar rhythm of the cabin. Tell me what happened while I was gone, Ethan said. Lena recounted it all, the first visit, the watcher on the ridge, the confrontation that morning. Ethan listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. He's desperate, Ethan said when she finished. Desperate enough to risk violence. That makes him dangerous in a different way. What do you mean? Men like Martin usually hide behind law and propriety. When they can't do that anymore, when they're exposed, they get reckless. Ethan poured coffee for both of them. We need to assume he's not done. Need to assume he's planning something else. So we hit him first, Lena said. Ethan's eyebrow rose. Listen to you. 3 months ago, you could barely look him in the eye. But 3 months ago, I was someone else. Lena wrapped her hands around the warm cup. That woman's gone. Yeah. Ethan's voice held something that might have been pride. Yeah, she is. They spent the rest of the day planning. Ethan had brought back supplies from Blackwater Springs: flour, salt, ammunition, and more importantly, information. He'd mapped out the back ways into Timber Hollow, the routes that avoided the main roads. He'd observed the patterns of the town watch, learned which buildings had easy access after dark. Martin's office is above the mining company headquarters, Ethan explained, sketching a rough map on paper. 2 stories, stone construction, guards on the main entrance, but there's a back stairway used by clerks that's less watched. You went there, Lena realized, while you were in town. Reconnaissance. If we're going to do this, we do it right. He marked another point on the map. Your father's cabin, Martin's claimed it, but the deed's still in dispute according to Cartwright. If there are any personal documents, they might still be there. We need both then, the office and the cabin. In one night, ideally. Get in, get what we need, get out before anyone knows we were there. Lena studied the map, her mind racing. When? Next dark moon, 2 weeks. Ethan met her eyes. Can you be ready? To break into my uncle's office and steal documents that prove he's a fraud? Lena smiled grimly. I've been ready for that my whole life. The 2 weeks that followed were intensive preparation disguised as ordinary winter routine. During the day, they maintained the homestead, kept up appearances, went through all the normal motions of mountain life. But every evening, after the sun went down and the world reduced to firelight and shadow, they planned. Ethan taught Lena to move silently through snow, to use darkness as cover, to read the sounds of a building for signs of occupation. He showed her how to pick simple locks, how to search a room efficiently, how to memorize details in case they couldn't take physical documents. You might not be able to take everything, he explained one night, demonstrating with the cabin's own lock. Sometimes you need to read and remember. Your father's contracts. You remember what they looked like? Lena closed her eyes, reaching back through years of memory. He kept them in a leather portfolio. Brown, with his initials stamped on the cover. Inside was the deed to the cabin, the mining share certificates, the original partnership agreement with Martin. Good. If you can't take the portfolio, can you recognize the documents well enough to testify about them? Yes. Then that's our minimum objective. Confirm the documents exist. Ideally, take them. If not, get enough details that Cartwright can subpoena them legally. It was like preparing for war, Lena thought. Every detail mattered. Every contingency needed consideration. One mistake could mean capture, prosecution, or worse. But beneath the planning, something else was growing. The easy partnership between her and Ethan had deepened during his absence. She'd proven she could survive alone, and that proof had changed the dynamic between them. He no longer treated her like someone who needed constant supervision, and she no longer looked to him for answers she should find herself. They'd become equals, partners, something neither of them knew quite how to name. One evening, a week before the planned raid, Lena finally voiced the question that had been haunting her. What happens after? She asked. They were sitting by the fire, Ethan sharpening knives while Lena cleaned the rifles. If we get the documents, if Cartwright builds a case, if we actually win, what happens? Ethan tested a blade against his thumb. You'd be legally independent, financially secure if the mining shares are worth what I think they are, free to do whatever you want. And if I want to stay here? The knife stilled in his hands. He looked at her across the fire, his expression unreadable. You'd really choose this? Winters that try to kill you, isolation, constant work just to survive? I'd choose freedom, Lena corrected. And if freedom looks like hard work and isolation, that's still better than the alternative. It's not a normal life. Normal life tried to sell me at auction. I'll pass. A smile ghosted across Ethan's face. You've gotten stubborn. I learned from the best. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds, the crack of the fire and the whisper of whetstone against steel. I built this place for one, Ethan said finally. Didn't plan on company, didn't want it. But if you stayed, he paused, choosing words carefully. I wouldn't object. It wasn't a declaration, wasn't romance or poetry, just Ethan being Ethan, honest, direct, offering what he could without pretense. And somehow, that made it worth more than any flowery speech. Then I'll stay, Lena said, if we survive this. When we survive this, Ethan corrected. The dark moon came with clear skies and bitter cold. They left the cabin at dusk, both dressed in dark clothes, armed but hoping they wouldn't need to be. The ride to Timber Hollow took 4 hours through frozen forest, following paths Ethan had scouted during his previous trips. They left the horses a mile outside town, hidden in a ravine with enough feed to keep them quiet. From there, they went on foot, two shadows moving through the winter night. Timber Hollow slept under a blanket of snow and darkness. A few windows glowed with lamplight, but most buildings were dark. The mining office stood at the center of town, a 2-story stone building that looked more like a fortress than a place of business. "Guards," Ethan whispered, pointing. 2 men stood at the main entrance, stamping their feet against the cold, breath visible in the moonless dark. "Back entrance?" Lena asked. "This way." They circled through alleys and back lots, avoiding the main street. The back of the mining office faced a loading area, currently empty. The stairway Ethan had mentioned was there, a rickety wooden structure that led to a second-floor door. "Stay close," Ethan breathed. "Move when I move. Stop when I stop." They crossed the open ground in a low run, reaching the base of the stairs without raising alarm. The steps creaked under their weight, each sound impossibly loud in the frozen silence. Lena held her breath, certain someone would hear, someone would shout, someone would... They reached the top. The door was locked, but it was a simple mechanism. Ethan had it open in seconds. Inside, darkness, the smell of paper and tobacco and cold stone. Ethan produced a shielded lantern, opening it just enough to give them light without being visible from outside. They were in a hallway. Doors lined both sides, each with a small nameplate. Ethan moved down the corridor, checking each one until he found what they were looking for. Martin Cross, Operations Director. The door was locked, but again, it yielded to Ethan's tools. They slipped inside and Lena's breath caught. The office was huge, dominated by a massive desk and walls lined with filing cabinets. It would take hours to search properly, hours they didn't have. "You take the desk," Ethan whispered. "I'll start on the files. Look for anything with your father's name or yours." They worked in frantic silence, pulling open drawers, scanning documents by the lantern's dim light. Most of it was routine business, payroll records, supply orders, production reports. But then, in the bottom drawer of the desk, Lena found it. The leather portfolio, her father's portfolio. The initials SC stamped in fading gold. Her hand shook as she opened it. Inside were the documents, exactly as she remembered. The deed to the cabin, the mining share certificates, 20% of the Holloway mine signed over to Samuel Cross in partnership with Martin Cross and 2 other men. The original agreement dated 15 years ago when her father was still whole and hopeful and alive. "Found them," she breathed. Ethan was at her side instantly. He scanned the documents quickly, his face hardening. "These are worth a fortune. The Holloway mine's been profitable for years, 20%. He looked at Lena. "You're rich, or you should be. Where's the money gone?" "Good question." Ethan pulled out more papers, and they both saw it at the same time. Transfer documents, signed with Samuel Cross's name but dated after his death. Transferring his shares to Martin in settlement of debts. Forgery, fraud, theft dressed up as legal transaction. "We need all of this," Ethan said. "Every page. Can you—" Footsteps in the hallway. They froze. The footsteps came closer, stopped outside the door. A key rattled in the lock. Ethan doused the lantern. Darkness slammed down. Lena heard him move, positioning himself beside the door. Her hand found her pistol, thumb on the hammer. The door opened. A figure entered, silhouetted against the dim hallway light. Male. Alone. Not a guard's uniform. "I know you're in here," Martin's voice said quietly. "I've been expecting you." Lena's finger tightened on the trigger, her heart hammering so loud she was certain Martin could hear it in the darkness. Beside the door, Ethan remained perfectly still, a shadow among shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Martin took 2 steps into the office and stopped. He made no move to light a lamp, didn't call for guards, just stood there in the darkness like he had all the time in the world. "I set a watch on the cabin," Martin said conversationally. "The moment you both left, my man rode here to warn me. I've been sitting in the saloon across the street for the past 3 hours, waiting. Knew you'd come eventually. Knew you couldn't resist." Lena said nothing, trying to control her breathing, trying to think. If he'd known they were coming, why hadn't he brought guards? Why face them alone in a dark office where they had every advantage? You can put the gun down, Lena, Martin continued. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to talk. We're done talking. Ethan's voice came from beside the door, low and dangerous. Are we? Even when I'm offering you a way out of this mess? Martin moved slowly to his desk, still making no aggressive moves. You came for the documents, the proof of my supposed fraud. Well, here's the thing. You can have them. Silence. Lena's mind raced, trying to find the trap. There had to be a trap. You're lying, she said. Am I? Martin struck a match, the sudden flare making them all blink. He lit a single candle on his desk, casting his face in harsh shadows. In the dim light, Lena could see he looked older than he had just weeks ago, tired, almost defeated. Look at me, Lena. Really look. Do I seem like a man who's winning? She did look. Saw the lines around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands as he set down the match. Saw something in his expression that might have been genuine exhaustion. Since you left Timber Hollow, I've had nothing but problems, Martin said, sinking into his chair. The other mine shareholders are asking questions about Samuel's death, about the transfer of his shares. Judge Morrison in Blackwater Springs sent an official inquiry. The Territorial Marshal's office is reviewing my guardianship petition. Everything I've built here is starting to crumble, and it's all because you wouldn't just accept your place. My place being sold like property? Lena's voice dripped acid. Your place being protected. Martin slammed his hand on the desk, the first real emotion breaking through. You think I wanted this? You think I enjoyed watching my brother drink himself to death? Watching him gamble away everything our family built? He was my father. He was a fool. Martin's face twisted. A brilliant, talented fool who couldn't handle one setback without falling apart. The mine accident broke more than his leg, Lena. It broke his spirit. And I watched him spiral, watched him destroy himself, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. You could have helped him, Lena said, her voice shaking. You could have. I did help him. I gave him money which he drank. I gave him work which he couldn't complete. I gave him chances, and he wasted every single one. Martin's voice dropped. And when he finally put a bullet in his own head, he left me to clean up the mess, left me to figure out what to do with a dead brother's debts, and a niece who had no prospects and no future. The words hit Lena like physical blows. She'd known her father was troubled, knew he'd struggled, but hearing it laid out so baldly, so brutally, made something crack inside her chest. So you sold me, she whispered. I tried to find you a husband, a real future. Martin looked at her with something that might have been genuine regret. But no one in Timber Hollow would take you. Samuel's reputation destroyed yours before you even had a chance. So yes, I arranged the auction, tried to find someone who'd give you a roof and food and protection. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than starving in the streets. Until Ethan paid, Lena said. Until he paid. Martin's gaze shifted to Ethan. $347. More than any reasonable man would spend, which made me wonder what you really wanted, what your angle was. No angle, Ethan said flatly. Just couldn't stand by and watch. Because of your sister. Martin nodded. Yes, I looked into you too. Ethan Hale, convicted of assault in Dakota Territory. Served a year. Sister named Sarah, who died under questionable circumstances. You've got your own demons, Mountain Man. Your own reasons for playing hero. I'm not playing anything. No? Martin leaned back in his chair. Then what do you call this? Breaking into my office, stealing documents, trying to build a case against me? Sounds like you're playing savior to a woman who doesn't need saving. I don't need saving, Lena interjected. I need justice. Justice, Martin laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to know about justice? Your father signed those transfer documents himself, 3 months before he died when he was sober enough to hold a pen. He knew he was drowning in debt, knew he couldn't provide for you, so he made a deal, signed over his shares to me in exchange for a promise that I'd look after you when he was gone. You're lying, Lena said, but uncertainty crept into her voice. Am I? Martin opened a drawer and pulled out another document, sliding it across the desk. See for yourself. That's his signature. That's his handwriting on the date. That's a notary seal from Judge Hendricks, dated while Samuel was still alive. Ethan moved forward and snatched up the document, angling it toward the candlelight. Lena watched his face, saw his expression tighten as he read. "Well," Martin prompted, "is it genuine?" "The signature looks right," Ethan admitted reluctantly. "But that doesn't mean—" "It means Samuel Cross knew exactly what he was doing," Martin interrupted. "He knew he was going to kill himself, knew he'd leave you alone, and in one of his few moments of clarity, he tried to make sure you'd be taken care of." Martin looked at Lena. "I'm a lot of things, Lena, but I kept my promise to your father. I tried to take care of you." "By selling me?" Lena's voice cracked. "By finding you a future when you had none." Martin stood, his control finally slipping. "You think I enjoyed any of this? You think I wanted to auction off my own niece? It was the only option left after every other door closed." "There's always another option," Ethan said quietly. "Easy for you to say from your mountain fortress," Martin shot back. "You don't live in society. Don't have to navigate its rules and expectations. You just run away and call it freedom." Better than staying and calling corruption civilization. Martin's jaw worked. For a moment, Lena thought he might attack Ethan physically. Then the fight seemed to drain out of him, leaving only tired resignation. "Take them," he said, gesturing to the portfolio. "Take all of it. The documents, the proof, whatever you need for your lawyer friend. Build your case. Drag me through territorial court. Expose every questionable decision I've made. See where it gets you." Lena stared at him, trying to find the trap. "Why would you just give them to us?" "Because I'm tired," Martin said simply. "Tired of fighting. Tired of trying to hold together an empire built on my brother's broken dreams. Tired of being the villain in a story where I thought I was doing the right thing." He met her eyes. "You want independence? Financial security? Fine. The shares are yours, 20% of the Holloway mine. Should be worth about $15,000, give or take. Enough to build whatever life you want, wherever you want it." "And what do you get?" Ethan asked suspiciously. "Peace, maybe. A chance to rebuild my reputation before Judge Morrison's inquiry destroys what's left of it." Martin's smile was bitter. "And maybe, just maybe, the knowledge that I actually did right by my brother's daughter in the end, even if she'll never believe it." Lena's mind reeled. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. Martin was supposed to fight, to threaten, to be the clear-cut villain she could hate without complication. He wasn't supposed to sound human. Wasn't supposed to make her question everything she'd believed about her father's last days. "I don't believe you," she said, but the words came out weaker than she intended. "You don't have to." Martin pulled out papers from another drawer, began signing them with quick practice strokes. "These are share transfer documents. Legal and proper this time, witnessed and notarized. They return Samuel's 20% to you with all accumulated dividends from the date of his death. About $18,000 total once the paperwork clears." He pushed the documents across the desk. "Take them. Take everything. Go back to your mountain. Build your life. Just—" He paused, and for the first time, Lena heard something genuine in his voice. "Just don't come back to Timber Hollow. Don't drag this through the courts. Let me salvage what I can of my reputation and my business. That's all I'm asking." Ethan picked up the documents, scanning them carefully. "These look legitimate, but we'd need Cartwright to verify—" "Of course you will. I expect nothing less." Martin pulled out a bottle of whiskey and a glass, pouring himself a drink with shaking hands. "But they're real, legal, binding. Everything you came here for, I'm handing you on a silver platter." "Why?" Lena demanded. "Why, really?" Martin drank, then looked at her with eyes that held too much pain and not enough sleep. "Because you were right," he said quietly. "About all of it. I did use my brother's death for profit. Did manipulate the situation to gain control of his shares. Did arrange that auction to serve my purposes more than yours. I told myself it was for your own good, that I was being practical, that someone had to make the hard decisions." He poured another drink. "But watching you stand up to me, watching you choose hardship and freedom over security and control, you reminded me of Samuel before the accident, before the drinking. When he was still the brother I admired." He raised his glass in a mock toast. "You're more his daughter than I gave you credit for, strong, stubborn, willing to fight for what you believe in, even when it's the harder path." He drank. So yes, take your inheritance, take your freedom, and maybe, someday, when you think of your Uncle Martin, you'll remember that in the end, I did the right thing. The office fell silent, except for the soft sputter of the candle. Lena stood there, portfolio in one hand, pistol in the other, trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the monster she'd built in her mind. He was both, neither. Something more complicated than she wanted to acknowledge. "I'll never forgive you for the auction," she said finally. "I don't expect you to. And I'll never forget that you chose control over my welfare. I wouldn't ask you to. But," Lena lowered her pistol, "I'll take the documents, the shares, the settlement, and I won't pursue charges if everything is as legal as you say it is." Martin nodded, something like relief crossing his face. "That's all I ask." Ethan gathered up all the papers, stuffing them carefully into a leather satchel he'd brought. His rifle never wavered from Martin's direction, trust only extending so far. "If this is a trick," Ethan warned, "if these documents are false, or if you send men after us, you'll kill me. I know." Martin waved a hand dismissively. "But it's not a trick. I'm done playing games with my niece's life. The shares are hers. The matter is settled." Lena moved toward the door, then stopped. One question still burned in her mind. "Did he really sign those transfer documents before he died?" she asked. "Or is that another lie?" Martin looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened another drawer and pulled out a letter, sealed with wax. He held it out to her. "This is for you. He wrote it the same day he signed the transfers. Made me promise to give it to you when you were ready to hear the truth." Martin's voice was soft now, almost gentle. "I don't know what it says. Never opened it. But maybe it'll answer your questions better than I can." Lena took the letter with trembling fingers, her father's handwriting on the envelope, her name in his familiar scrawl. "We're leaving," Ethan said, his hand on Lena's elbow, guiding her toward the door. "One more thing," Martin called as they reached the threshold. "The cabin, your father's cabin. The deed is in that portfolio. It's yours too, always was. I just kept it maintained. In case you wanted to come back someday." Lena didn't trust herself to speak. She just nodded and let Ethan lead her out of the office, down the rickety stairs, into the frozen night. They made it back to the horses without incident. Made it out of Timber Hollow's outskirts before Lena finally let herself feel the enormity of what had just happened. She started shaking, great tremors that had nothing to do with the cold. Ethan stopped, pulling his horse alongside hers. "You all right?" "I don't know," Lena admitted. I thought it would feel different. Vindication, victory, something clean." She looked down at the satchel containing her future. "But it just feels complicated." "That's because people are complicated," Ethan said. "Your uncle's not a simple villain. Doesn't excuse what he did, but it makes it harder to hate him completely." "I wanted to hate him completely." "I know, sometimes that's easier." Ethan urged his horse forward again. "But easy and right aren't always the same thing." They rode in silence for a while, the forest closing in around them, offering the comfort of familiar darkness. "Are you going to read it?" Ethan asked finally. "The letter?" Lena's hand went to her coat pocket where she'd tucked the sealed envelope. "Eventually, not tonight. Tonight I just—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Understood." They reached the cabin as dawn was breaking, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. The world looked new, washed clean by light and cold and possibility. Inside, Ethan built up the fire while Lena made coffee with hands that had finally stopped shaking. They sat across from each other at the small table, the satchel of documents between them like a bridge to a different future. "We should get these to Cartwright," Ethan said, carefully examining each paper. "Make sure they're all legal and binding. Make sure Martin didn't slip something past us." "You don't trust him." "I don't trust anyone who gives up that easy." Ethan set down a share certificate, his expression thoughtful. "But if these are legitimate, Lena, you're a wealthy woman. You could buy a house in San Francisco, travel east, do anything you wanted." The unspoken question hung between them. "I already told you what I want," Lena said quietly, "before you knew you had options." "I have options now. I'm choosing this." She gestured to the cabin, the mountains beyond the window, the simple, hard life they'd built together. "I'm choosing freedom. Real freedom. Not the kind bought with money." Ethan's expression softened in a way she'd never seen before. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He nodded slowly, accepting her choice without question, without trying to talk her out of it. That was who he was, someone who respected her agency absolutely, even when he might have wished for something different. Then we'll make it official, he said. Get the shares transferred. Set up an account in Blackwater Springs so you have access to the money. Use it to improve the homestead, maybe buy the land outright so no one can ever claim we're squatting. Build something real here. Together, Lena added. Together, Ethan agreed. The word felt like a promise, like a future taking shape in the space between them. Over the next few days, they settled back into the rhythm of mountain life, but everything felt different now, lighter. The threat that had hung over Lena since the auction was gone. Martin had surrendered. The law, for once, was on her side. She was free in ways she'd never imagined possible. But the letter burned in her pocket like a coal. Finally, 3 days after their return, Lena took it out. She sat by the fire while Ethan was outside tending to the horses, breaking the wax seal with trembling fingers. The paper inside was covered in her father's handwriting, cramped and unsteady, but unmistakably his. My dearest Lena, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Martin has finally given you what I couldn't bear to give myself, the truth. I am a coward. I know this. I've known it since the mine accident took my leg and my courage in one fell swoop. I should have been stronger, should have fought harder to rebuild our life. But the pain, not just in my leg but in my spirit, was too much to bear. By the time I write this, I've already made my decision. I won't burden you with the details. Just know that I can't go on. Can't face another day of failure and shame. Can't watch you suffer because of my weakness. I've signed my shares over to Martin, not because I trust him completely, but because he's practical in ways I never was. He'll make sure you're taken care of, even if his methods are harsh. I'm asking him to find you a future, some way forward when I can't provide one myself. I know you'll be angry. You have every right to be. I'm abandoning you in the cruelest way possible. But please understand, I'm not leaving because I don't love you. I'm leaving because I love you too much to keep dragging you down with me. You deserve better than a broken father and a doomed future. You deserve strength and hope and possibility. I pray that Martin can give you what I couldn't. Be strong, my girl. Be braver than I was. Choose life, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Your loving father, Samuel. Lena read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, her chest tight with emotions too complicated to name. Grief for the father she'd lost, anger at his abandonment, understanding finally of the pain that had driven him to that final desperate choice. He'd been broken, and in his brokenness, he'd tried to protect her the only way he knew how, by making a deal with a brother he didn't entirely trust, hoping it would be enough. Lena? Ethan's voice came from the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. She looked up, tears on her cheeks, the letter clutched in her hand. He knew, she whispered. He knew he was going to kill himself. He planned it, and he thought signing away his shares to Martin would protect me. Ethan crossed the room and sat beside her, not touching, just present. Did it? Lena thought about the auction block, about the terror and humiliation, about Martin's twisted attempt at protection through control, about everything that had happened since. No, she said finally, but it led me here, to this mountain, to you, to freedom I didn't know existed. She folded the letter carefully, tucking it back into the envelope. My father was weak, she continued, her voice steadier now. And Martin was cruel in the name of practicality, but somehow, through all of it, I found strength neither of them could have given me. Found it in myself. You did, Ethan agreed quietly. So maybe the answer is that both things are true. My father loved me and abandoned me. Martin hurt me and tried to protect me. People are complicated, and sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. She wiped her eyes, feeling something settle inside her chest. Not closure, exactly, but acceptance. The ability to hold all the complicated truths at once without breaking under their weight. I'm going to keep the shares, she decided. Use the money to build something here. Make this place into a real home. Maybe even help other people who need a fresh start. Ethan's eyebrow rose. Other people? Women like me. People trapped by circumstances and cruel systems. Lena's voice grew stronger as the idea took shape. We have land, resources. We could build cabins, offer refuge, give people the same chance you gave me. That's ambitious. I know, but I'm tired of thinking small, tired of just surviving. She looked at Ethan, seeing him clearly for the first time, not as a savior or a teacher, but as a partner, an equal. You showed me I could be more than what the world tried to make me. Now I want to show others. Ethan studied her face for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile that transformed his hard features into something almost gentle. All right then, he said, let's build something worth building. 2 weeks later, they rode to Blackwater Springs together. Elizabeth Cartwright turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, with gray-streaked hair and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd won more fights than she'd lost. She examined the documents Lena and Ethan brought with the focus of a jeweler examining diamonds. These are legitimate, she finally announced. The transfers, the share certificates, the accumulated dividends, all of it. Your uncle either had a change of heart or decided cutting his losses was smarter than fighting a losing battle. Can he reverse them? Lena asked. Not legally. Once these are filed with the territorial recorder, they're binding. Cartwright looked up, her expression approving. You're a wealthy woman, Miss Cross. $18,000 is more than most people see in a lifetime. The number still didn't feel real. Lena had spent so long thinking in terms of pennies and survival that thousands of dollars might as well have been millions. What about the cabin? Ethan asked. The deed. Also legitimate. The property is yours, free and clear. Cartwright pulled out more papers. I'll need you to sign some documents for the territorial recorder, establish your legal identity, confirm the transfers, set up accounts for the dividend payments. But it's all straightforward. They spent the afternoon buried in paperwork and legal language. By the time they emerged from Cartwright's office, Lena's hand ached from signing her name so many times, but she was officially, legally, and irrevocably free. How does it feel? Ethan asked as they walked through Blackwater Springs' main street. Surreal, Lena admitted, like someone else's life. It's yours now. What do you want to do with it? Lena looked around at the bustling town. Shops and saloons, people going about their business, the whole machinery of civilization grinding along. A few months ago, this would have been her dream, a place where she could disappear into the crowd, start over, be someone new. Now it just felt cramped. I want to go home, she said. Ethan's smile told her he'd hoped she'd say that. They spent the next few days in Blackwater Springs, making purchases, building supplies, tools, seeds for spring planting, blankets and clothing, ammunition, books for the long winter nights, everything they'd need to expand the homestead, to build the refuge Lena had envisioned. When they finally headed back up the mountain, they brought 2 pack mules loaded with enough supplies to transform possibility into reality. The ride back felt different. Lena sat straighter in her saddle, comfortable now, with the rhythm of the horse beneath her. The mountains didn't feel threatening anymore. They felt like home. When spring comes, Lena said as they climbed toward the cabin, we'll start building. Another cabin first, maybe 2. Smaller than the main house, but solid. Places where people can stay while they figure out their next steps. We'll need more land cleared, Ethan mused. More gardens. Maybe expand the barn for additional horses. And we'll need to spread the word. Carefully. Let people know there's a place they can come if they need it. Through Cartwright, maybe. She'd know who needs help. They were planning together, building a shared vision of the future. It felt natural now, this partnership, like they'd been doing it for years instead of months. The cabin came into view as the sun set behind the western peaks, and Lena felt something warm bloom in her chest. Relief. Belonging. The bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. That night, as they sat by the fire discussing plans and possibilities, Ethan finally asked the question Lena had been expecting. What about Martin? You really going to let it go? No charges, no public exposure? Lena considered the question carefully. Her uncle had hurt her, no question, had tried to control her in the name of protection, had orchestrated her public humiliation at that auction. But he'd also kept his promise to her father in his own twisted way, and in the end, he'd let her go. Yes, she said finally. I'm letting it go. Not because he deserves it, but because I deserve peace more than revenge. Ethan nodded, respecting her choice even if he might have chosen differently. Besides, Lena continued, the best revenge is living well, building something better, proving that his way, control and manipulation, isn't the only path forward. Living well, Ethan repeated. I like that. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the promise of spring still months away but definitely coming. Lena thought about the woman she'd been, standing trembling on that auction block, convinced her life was over. That woman was gone, transformed by cold and work and the kind of freedom that came from choosing hardship over safety. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd faced down armed men and corrupt authority, someone who'd learned to shoot and hunt and survive, someone who'd chosen her own future instead of accepting the one assigned to her. The journey from victim to survivor to something more, something Lena didn't have a name for yet, but recognized in the steady beat of her own heart, had been brutal. But it had also been necessary, because you couldn't choose freedom without first understanding what it cost. And Lena had paid the price in fear and pain and hard-won strength. Now she was ready to help others pay it too. To build a refuge in the mountains where the world's broken people could come to heal, where women sold at auction or trapped by circumstance could learn what Lena had learned, that survival was just the beginning, that real freedom meant choosing your battles and fighting them on your own terms. That strength wasn't given, it was claimed, forged, earned, through every small victory over fear and circumstance and the voice that said, you couldn't, you shouldn't, you weren't strong enough. Lena was strong enough now, more than strong enough. And when spring came, she'd prove it by building something that would last longer than her anger, longer than Martin's cruelty, longer than the fear that had once defined her. She'd build hope. Spring came to the mountain like a promise kept. The snow began its slow retreat in early March, revealing muddy earth and the first brave shoots of green pushing through the thaw. The stream swelled with meltwater, roaring past the cabin with renewed vigor. Birds returned, filling the forest with songs that sounded like celebration after months of silence. Lena stood on the porch watching the world wake up, a cup of coffee warming her hands, and felt something shift inside her chest. Winter had been survival. Spring would be transformation. Ready to start building? Ethan emerged from the barn, tools already in hand, his breath still visible in the cold morning air. More than ready, Lena said. They'd spent the last weeks of winter planning every detail. The new cabins would be built on the eastern edge of the property, close enough to the main house for support, but far enough for privacy. Small structures, one room each, but solid and warm. Places where people could heal without feeling watched or judged. The first foundation went down in late March. Lena worked alongside Ethan, learning to measure and cut and fit logs together with the same precision he'd taught her for everything else. Her hands, already calloused from winter work, developed new layers of toughness. Her back ached in different ways. But every beam they raised felt like defiance against the world that had tried to break her. "You're getting good at this," Ethan observed one afternoon as Lena notched a log with steady, confident strikes of the axe. "I had a good teacher. You had determination. I just pointed you in the right direction." They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that came from two people who'd learned each other's rhythms completely. Lena no longer needed instruction for most tasks. She anticipated what needed doing and did it, and Ethan did the same, until the work flowed between them like a conversation without words. By mid-April, the first cabin's walls were up. By early May, the roof was on, and the interior was being fitted with a simple bed frame, a table, shelves for belongings. Nothing fancy, but everything functional. Everything built to last. "It's good work," Ethan said, standing back to admire what they'd created. "Solid. Someone could live here for years. That's the idea." Lena ran her hand along the doorframe, feeling the smoothness of wood they'd sanded and sealed. A place where time doesn't have to be measured in days until you can leave, where you can actually build something. She was talking about more than the cabin, and they both knew it. The second cabin went up faster, their skills sharpening with practice. By June, they had two complete structures standing like sentinels at the edge of the meadow, ready to offer shelter. But buildings were only part of what was needed. We need a way to let people know this exists, Lena said one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. But carefully. We can't just announce it publicly. Martin might have backed down, but there are others like him, people who'd see this as a threat. Cartwright, Ethan suggested. She knows who needs help, knows who can be trusted. So they rode to Blackwater Springs in late June, the world fully green now, wildflowers turning the meadows into riots of color. Elizabeth Cartwright listened to their proposal with the same sharp attention she'd given the legal documents months before. A refuge, she said slowly, testing the word, for women escaping bad situations. You'd provide housing, teach them skills, help them get on their feet. That's the plan, Lena confirmed. We have the space, the resources, and I know what it's like to need a way out and have no options. Cartwright studied Lena's face, seeing things that made her nod slowly. I have 3 clients right now who could use exactly what you're offering. Women trapped in situations that aren't quite illegal enough to prosecute, but are destroying them nonetheless. One's being forced to work off her dead husband's debts. Another's fleeing an arranged marriage to a man twice her age. The third, she paused. The third reminds me of you. Sold by family, nowhere to run. Lena's chest tightened. Send them to us, all 3. We're ready. You understand what you're taking on. These women will be scared, damaged. Some will have been broken by what they've endured. They won't trust easily, won't heal quickly. I know, Lena said, because I was them. But I also know that with time and work, and someone who doesn't give up on you, healing is possible. Cartwright smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her professional reserve. Then I'll send them. But slowly. One at a time, maybe. Give you both a chance to adjust. One at a time works, Ethan agreed. The first woman arrived in early July. Her name was Sarah, the universe's cruel joke that made Ethan's face go tight when he heard it. And she was 19 years old with eyes that had seen too much too soon. She came on a wagon driven by one of Cartwright's associates, carrying nothing but a cloth bag and visible terror. Lena met her at the edge of the property, keeping her body language open and non-threatening, remembering her own fear when she'd first arrived. Sarah? I'm Lena. Welcome. The girl flinched at the word welcome, like it was a trap. Ma'am, I don't mean to be trouble. Miss Cartwright said you might have work. I can clean, cook, whatever you need. This isn't about work, Lena interrupted gently. Well, there's work, but that's not why you're here. You're here because you needed a safe place. This is that place. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She tried desperately to blink back. I don't understand. You will. Come on. Let me show you your cabin. Leading Sarah to the smaller cabin, watching her face transform from suspicion to cautious hope as she saw the space that would be hers alone, Lena felt something powerful bloom in her chest. This was what freedom looked like when you gave it to someone else. This was the opposite of that auction block, the inverse of control and cruelty. This was choosing to lift instead of crush. Sarah settled in slowly, jumping at sudden noises, watching Ethan with visible fear whenever he was near. Lena understood that too. Understood that trust had to be earned, especially from men, especially when men had been the source of most of her pain. But Ethan understood as well. He kept his distance, spoke softly when he had to speak at all, made himself as non-threatening as a man his size could be. And gradually, over days and then weeks, Sarah began to relax, began to understand that this mountain refuge operated under different rules than the world below. Lena taught her the same things Ethan had taught her. How to split logs, tend animals, shoot straight. How to measure her worth in competence instead of compliance. How to transform fear into fuel. And Sarah learned. Slowly at first, then with growing confidence. By August, she was checking trap lines on her own. By September, she'd bagged her first deer and cried with pride over the accomplishment. I never thought I could do something like that, she said, standing over the animal, her rifle still smoking. Never thought I could be someone who provides instead of just survives. You were always that person, Lena said. You just needed the chance to prove it. The second woman arrived in late August. Clara was older, 35, and worn down by years of working off debts that somehow never decreased. She came with anger instead of fear, fury at the world barely contained beneath a veneer of exhausted civility. Lena recognized that anger, had felt it herself, burning in her chest during those first weeks on the mountain. So instead of trying to soothe it, she gave Clara an axe and pointed at the woodpile. "Split until you're tired," she said simply. Clara looked at her like she was crazy, then at the axe, then back at Lena. Then she picked up the tool and swung. She split wood for 3 hours straight, working through anger and grief and years of accumulated rage. When she finally stopped, exhausted and shaking, Lena was there with water and understanding. "Better?" Lena asked. "No," Clara gasped, "but different." Different is a start. Clara became the homestead's fiercest defender. She threw herself into every task with the kind of intensity that came from having something to prove, to the world, to herself, to the men who'd used her labor without compensation for years. She learned to build furniture from scrap wood, her carpenter's hands remembering skills from before debt had trapped her. She expanded the vegetable garden, tripling its size and yield. She even began teaching Sarah some of what she knew, the two women forming an unlikely friendship built on shared survival. By the time the third woman arrived in October, the homestead had transformed into something more than just Lena and Ethan's refuge. It had become a community. The third woman was named Marie, and she was 17 and pregnant and absolutely terrified. The arranged marriage Cartwright had mentioned was to a man who'd beaten her during their brief engagement. She'd run before the wedding, run with nothing but the clothes on her back and a child growing inside her. "I don't know how to do this," Marie whispered that first night, curled up in her cabin, one hand on her swelling belly. "I don't know how to be a mother. Don't know how to survive. Don't know anything." Lena sat beside her, remembering her own desperate uncertainty, her own fear of a future she couldn't control. "You don't have to know everything right now," she said. "You just have to know that you're safe here, that you have time to figure it out, that you're not alone. But when the baby comes, there will be 4 women here who will help you, who will teach you, who will make sure both of you are taken care of." Lena squeezed Marie's hand. "You made it here. That took more strength than you probably realize. Everything else, we'll face together." Marie's baby was born in late February, delivered in the main cabin with Lena and Clara attending. It was a girl, tiny and perfect, and howling with the kind of fury that suggested she'd inherited her mother's survival instinct. They named her Hope. Ethan built a cradle from pine wood, sanded so smooth there wasn't a single rough edge to scratch delicate skin. Sarah sewed blankets from fabric they'd bought in Blackwater Springs. Clara organized shifts so Marie could sleep while someone watched the baby. And Lena held that tiny, wrinkled miracle in her arms and felt the last piece of her own brokenness finally heal. This was what it meant to build something better. Not just surviving, but creating space for new life, for new possibilities, for futures that hadn't existed before. Spring came again, the second since Lena had climbed that mountain, and the homestead bloomed. Sarah announced she wanted to stay permanently, to make this her home instead of just her refuge. Clara was planning to start a carpentry business, building furniture to sell in Blackwater Springs. Marie was learning to be a mother with the kind of fierce dedication she'd once reserved for escaping her arranged marriage, and Lena stood at the center of it all, no longer the frightened woman who'd needed saving, but the one doing the saving. One evening in late April, as they all sat on the main cabin's porch watching Hope toddle through the grass with the kind of fearless joy only children possessed, Sarah asked the question they'd all been wondering. "What happens next? When word spreads about this place? When more women need help?" Lena looked at Ethan, who'd been quietly whittling by the fire. He glanced up, his winter sky eyes meeting hers, and she saw the answer there before he spoke it. "We build more cabins," he said simply. "Expand the gardens. Take on whoever needs taking on." "We can't save everyone," Clara pointed out, ever practical. "No," Lena agreed. "But we can save some. And those some can go on to save others. That's how change happens. Not all at once, but person by person, choice by choice." That night, after the others had retired to their cabins, and Hope was sleeping peacefully in Marie's arms, Lena and Ethan sat by the fire in comfortable silence. "You did it," Ethan said finally. "Built what you said you would." "We did it," Lena corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "You could have. Would have found a way." He set down his whittling, looking at her directly. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, Lena Cross. And I don't say that lightly. The words settled into Lena's chest like warmth. Coming from Ethan, who'd survived prison and exile and years of isolation, who'd built this homestead from nothing through sheer stubborn will, the compliment meant everything. I learned from watching you, she said. Learned that strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what needs doing anyway. Is that what you think I did? Isn't it? You were terrified of hurting someone again. Terrified of your own capacity for violence. So you exiled yourself to a mountain where you couldn't hurt anyone. But when you saw me on that auction block, you chose to act anyway, chose to risk being the person you feared you were in order to do what was right. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I never thought of it that way. Well, that's what I saw. That's what gave me courage to face my own fears. Lena moved closer, closing the distance between them that had been carefully maintained for so long. You saved me, Ethan. Not by paying my debt, but by showing me what freedom actually looks like. And what does it look like? Like this. Like choosing hardship and community over safety and isolation. Like building something that lasts. Like... She paused, gathering courage. Like letting yourself care about people again, even when it's terrifying. Ethan's expression shifted. Something vulnerable breaking through the hard exterior he'd maintained for so long. Lena, I love you, she said, the words simple and true and inevitable. I think I have for months, but I needed to be sure I was choosing you because I wanted to, not because I needed to. Needed to know I could survive without you before I could truly be with you. And now? Now I know I can survive anything, can stand on my own 2 feet, can build a life from nothing. She reached for his hand, calloused and scarred and strong. And I'm choosing to build that life with you, if you'll have me. Ethan looked at their joined hands, then at her face, and for the first time since she'd met him, he smiled with absolutely no reservation. I'd have you, he said. I'd have you from the moment you chose to follow me into the mountains. Have been yours from the moment you stood up to your uncle with a rifle and no fear. Would be yours for however long you'll keep me. Lena laughed, the sound bright and free and full of joy. Then I guess we're building this life together after all. He kissed her then, slow and careful and certain, and Lena felt the last walls between them finally crumble. They'd been partners for months. Now they were something more. Something that had no name except theirs. The summer brought more women. A widow fleeing her dead husband's creditors. Twin sisters escaping an abusive father. A woman who'd been working in a saloon not by choice, but by force, who arrived with haunted eyes and a desperate need for safety. The homestead expanded to meet the need. More cabins went up. The garden sprawled across a full acre. They built a workshop where Clara could practice her carpentry. They established a school of sorts, teaching reading and writing alongside practical skills. And slowly, story by story, woman by woman, the refuge became known. Not publicly, that would have been too dangerous, but through careful whispers and trusted contacts, through Cartwright's network and the women who'd stayed and healed and gone back into the world, carrying hope like a torch. Word spread of a place in the mountains where women could go to be free, where no one asked about their past or judged their choices, where strength was built through work and community instead of crushed by cruelty and control. Martin never came back. Lena heard through Cartwright that he'd sold his interests in the mining company and moved east, to Denver, or maybe further. That the investigation into his business practices had found enough irregularities to destroy his reputation, even if it hadn't resulted in criminal charges. She felt nothing about his departure. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even relief. He'd become irrelevant to her life, a chapter closed and left behind. One autumn afternoon, 2 years after she'd first arrived at the mountain, Lena stood at the edge of the property, looking down at the cluster of cabins they'd built. Smoke rose from 6 chimneys. Laughter drifted from the garden where Sarah and 2 newer arrivals were harvesting the last of the season's vegetables. Hope toddled between cabins, now walking steady and chattering in the way of 2-year-olds, belonging to everyone and no one, loved by all. This was what winning looked like, Lena thought. Not revenge against those who'd hurt her, not even justice, really, though that mattered too. But this, the creation of something good from the ashes of something terrible. The transformation of pain into purpose. She'd been sold at auction for her father's debts. had stood on that platform certain her life was ending, had been wrong in ways she couldn't have imagined, because her life hadn't ended that day. It had begun. Begun the moment a stranger paid a fortune to set her free, continued through brutal winter and harder lessons, grew through confrontation and choice and the slow accumulation of small victories that became massive change. And now here she stood, no longer victim or survivor, but builder, creator. The woman who'd taken her own freedom and used it as a foundation to offer freedom to others. Thinking deep thoughts? Ethan appeared beside her, as he so often did, moving quiet as shadow. Just taking inventory. Of what? Everything we've built. Everything we've become. She leaned into him, and his arm came around her shoulders automatically. 2 years ago, I couldn't imagine any of this. Couldn't imagine being strong enough or brave enough or free enough. And now? Now I can't imagine being anything else. They stood together watching their community. And it was a community now, not just a refuge, but a home for a dozen women rebuilding their lives. Go about the business of living, of thriving, of proving that the world's cruelty didn't have to be the final word. That night, gathered around a bonfire in the meadow, the women shared stories. Not of their pasts, those were told or not told as each person chose, but of their futures. Dreams they'd stopped allowing themselves. Possibilities they were only now beginning to believe in. Clara wanted to open a shop in Blackwater Springs, selling furniture to fund the homestead's expansion. Sarah had been studying law books Cartwright had sent, dreaming of becoming an advocate for women like them. Marie wanted to make sure Hope grew up knowing she could be anything, do anything, become anyone she chose to be. "What about you?" one of the newer women asked Lena. "What's your dream?" Lena looked around the circle, at faces lit by firelight and possibility. Looked at Ethan beside her, solid and certain. Looked at the mountains rising dark against a sky full of stars. "This," she said simply, "this is my dream. Building a place where women can choose their own futures, where strength is taught instead of crushed, where no one has to stand on an auction block ever again because they have somewhere else to go." "But you already have that," the woman pressed. "Then I dream of keeping it, of expanding it, of making sure that long after I'm gone, this place still stands as proof that survival is possible, that freedom is worth fighting for, that one person's choice to act with courage can change everything for someone else." The fire crackled and sparked, sending embers up into the darkness like hopes taking flight. Lena thought about the woman she'd been, standing on that platform while men bid on her future. Thought about how far she'd come from that moment of absolute powerlessness. Thought about every hard choice, every moment of fear, every time she'd wanted to give up but hadn't. All of it had led here, to this circle of women who'd found their way to freedom through the path Lena had cut. To this community built on the principle that no one should have to face their darkness alone. To this life that was hard and beautiful and entirely her own. She reached for Ethan's hand, felt his fingers close around hers with the certainty of 2 years' partnership. The woman who'd been sold for debt was gone. In her place was someone who couldn't be bought or sold or broken. Someone who'd learned that true strength wasn't given by others. It was claimed through every act of defiance against a world determined to make you small. Someone who'd discovered that the opposite of being controlled wasn't just freedom. It was the choice to use that freedom to ensure others could be free too. Winter would come again, there would be new challenges, new women needing refuge, new battles to fight. The work would never be finished because the world's cruelty was endless and adaptable. But so was Lena's determination. So was this community's strength. So was the simple, revolutionary act of building something better from the ruins of something terrible. The fire burned bright against the darkness, warming faces and hearts and the cold mountain air. Around it, women laughed and planned and dreamed impossible dreams that were becoming possible one day at a time. And Lena Cross, who'd once had her worth measured in dollars and desperation, sat at the center of it all and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Free, strong, unbreakable. Not because someone had saved her, but because she'd saved herself. And then she'd turned around and offered that salvation to everyone who followed.